Head-to-Head, a Star Wars podcast. This week, we got an announcement for the Bad Batch series coming to Disney+. Kathleen Kennedy might be stepping down as head of Lucasfilm. We're going to pit the sequel trilogy against the Zahn Trilogy. But first, we got a really special thing for you. Disney may be erasing the sequel trilogy. Is that going to happen? Well, we're going to find out right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. All right, man.
Yeah.
What do you say we just get right into this?
Get right into the meat of the matter.
Before we do it, I just feel the need to address, we weren't actually able to go on the air last week. Unfortunately, I was sort of coming down with this weird illness, which I still have. Still not feeling that good, but you know what? Couldn't let another week go by. So,
yeah, man, we're glad to have you back.
All right, man. You ready to talk some Star Wars?
Let's get to it.
All right, let's do it.
All right.
All right, so this is actually something that's been happening, or it's been brewing for quite some time. And in fact, you and I actually addressed this on our last show.
Yeah.
Where somebody, I think, wrote in on the Clear Your Mind segment, if I'm not mistaken.
Possibly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically what we're talking about here is the sequel trilogy possibly being erased. So there's been a lot of talk about, a lot of fans are kind of disgruntled about how the sequel trilogy went on, primarily The Last Jedi movie, but then, of course, that kind of spilled over into Rise of Skywalker. So a lot of people have kind of been, clamoring at the fact that the sequel trilogy might actually be considered non-canon, and then they actually may do another sequel trilogy that will be considered canon.
Yeah, now the funny thing about this whole thing is that I remember when the question came up on our last show, and I'm like, yeah, no, pay no attention to it. It's just a crazy rumor. But one of the reasons why I want to talk about it this week is because it's starting to gain momentum. I mean, more people are talking about it, more. There's just I don't know, it just seems like there's got to be something to this.
Well, the whole thing kind of stems from what I've read, the whole the arc in the Clone Wars, I believe, where they had, was it the Clone Wars or Rebels?
Yeah, it was Rebels.
Rebels, okay.
The World Between Worlds.
The World Between Worlds, yeah. Because there was a similar episode kind of like that in the Clone Wars a little bit.
Yeah,
but
I remember it.
But yeah, the World Between Worlds, where there's different time dimensions, I guess, within the Force. And I guess in their explanation for the sequel trilogy is this is just one of the gateways that we got a chance to look through. Palpatine, apparently on the second Death Star, had this room called a Room of Mirrors or something like that, where he was using a lot of Sith magic, a lot of Sith, and a lot of dark side powers or whatnot to kind of create different things. He was always big into creating things. He always wanted to kind of alter and create certain things. So apparently this is where this has all been derived from, is the whole World Between Worlds series. So now I've read that it's not going to happen. This is a whole, in the words of the Trump, it's a whole hoax pretty much. That this
It's gotta be.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
I can't imagine.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if you do that, like we said last time, you're going to, one, especially confuse the fans, because then now they're not going to know what to believe is canon and what's not, especially when the movies have always been canon.
And that's what I said the last time. I'm like, you can't do this because, first of all, you're going to take a mistake that Disney obviously made, and you're going to compound it. I mean, now you're really going to lose your way because, like you said, you're going to lose fans. You're going to, I mean, think about it this way. Everybody was actually confused when they released Rogue One and Solo, especially Rogue One. They're like, well, wait, is this the sequel to 7? Is this
right?
Now imagine if they just scrapped the entire sequel series and go, no, just kidding. This is the real episode 7, 8, and 9.
And if you do that, what does that say about the directors? Okay, Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, those two guys are the ones who are responsible for the sequel trilogy. So essentially, you're saying that they suck, and it's kind of like, that's kind of, I don't think they really want to put that out there, especially to say like a reputation of now. People can and I think a lot of people are happy in general with what J.J. Abrams has done for Star Wars. Their main issue was Rian Johnson, and they felt like J.J. had to make the move in Rise of Skywalker to kind of cover up or appease people for The Last Jedi. Even though J.J. was the executive producer, if I'm not mistaken, on... Well, it may not be,
Yeah, he was on The Last Jedi.
On The Last Jedi?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't know if it was Kathleen Steele, it was executive or
Well, I
not.
mean, she is an executive producer, but I mean, and obviously she's steering the ship, but definitely JJ had his hands in it too. I mean, he wasn't hands-on.
Right.
But, certainly he was aware of what was going on. He knew the storyline. I mean, but in a weird sort of like world, how would you think that this could actually work? Like if you had to, what would you do if you were basically said, okay, we're going to scrap the whole sequel trilogy and now we're going to do a new 7, 8, 9. What would you do?
The new 7, 8, 9?
Yeah.
I think I'll probably just do the Zahn Trilogy, honestly.
Exactly. Right answer.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, you and I have talked before, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but just the fact that, you could take Zahn's trilogy with these new characters that you've created already and just plug them in and just run it that way.
Oh, and by the way, if you guys, those of you who are watching us live, feel free to chat in and, give us your thoughts and opinions while we're discussing this, because that's part of the reason why we're here. Big community. But yeah, I think that the Zahn trilogy, first of all, I should say that that's what I thought they should have done in the first place.
Sure.
I don't necessarily understand why they didn't do it. Now, here's the problem. It's almost like they would have to do something like de-age the actors or something like that if they wanted to do it faithfully.
Yeah.
That's the only problem that I had, and that's where they're really being painted in a corner.
So here's my question. So for you, we have, the whole Skywalker saga has been pretty much that. Like the Star Wars saga as we've known it has always been about the Skywalkers, as far as Luke's journey to becoming a Jedi, Vader's redemption, or we're watching the fall of Vader. That's pretty much been even when you watch it Rogue One, I mean, that's still in the background, if you will. Mm-hmm. So with the sequel trilogy, what type of what type of peril or what type of situation needs to happen to create, because like we've already had like the Skywalker thing, and I think that was kind of almost, like we said, was wrapped up perfectly in my opinion in Return of the Jedi. Like you couldn't have really written it better than that. So at that point, if you're going to do a sequel trilogy, since you don't have a Vader, since you don't have an Emperor.
Well, that was, if you remember, that's where Thrawn was introduced, and he was the new villain. Right.
So does that still...
Yeah, you could still do it. You mean because of the way they've sort of jacked around canon a little bit?
Well, I mean,
at least the expanded universe story.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I think that's the reason why they brought back Palpatine, was because it's like you almost like...
Nah, I mean, the way that Thrawn was written in those books, he very much was a formidable enemy. And then don't forget that he actually... what was that old Jedi? Joris Kabath or Baoth or something like that. He brought this like sort of ancient wizened Jedi master. He might have been a clone of somebody. And then of course he had, he eventually in one of the books, I can't remember if it was Last Command.
It's been a while since I've
read
the
I mean,
Zahn
it's
Trilogy.
been a long time since I read it. But they basically cloned Luke. And it was like Luke, like Luuke or something. And it was like he, I mean, there was a couple little things in there that were like, okay. But I mean, for the most part, though, it was exactly what it needed to be. It was a continuation of the Zahn trilogy. Yeah. Or, the Skywalker saga. And then Thrawn was very much a formidable villain. And he also had those, Isalamari or something like that. Those like little creatures that essentially created a force bubble. Yeah. So the force wouldn't affect them, and I mean, they kept the essence of Thrawn in this new canon that they've developed. But I mean, he was pretty crazy in that, and he was very calculating. And there's a lot of things that are similar. Like I said, when they ported him over to new canon, they kept the essence of Thrawn, but yeah, he was really dangerous.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to, when you're dealing with people who have the Force, so it's like you either have to deal with another Sith Lord that has arisen, but the problem with that is, and that's where I feel like some things are kind of painted into a corner, is because with the Sith, you have the rule of two. So Vader and Palpatine were both vanquished at the end of Return of the Jedi. So technically, they're no more Sith. So where, you see what I'm saying? Like, who's going to be powerful enough to stop Luke is basically. And so now you have to start coming up with these
because it was almost like Thrawn was able to use that. Plus, he had these two clones or whatever that were extremely powerful in the Force, including essentially what was a dark side version of Luke. So, and he had this whole master plan. Again, I mean, a lot of the details escape me because it has been like 20 or 30 years since I read this thing.
Probably like 25 years.
But, I mean, basically it was a really good story. It was very believable. It was something that I think that they could have made some really good movies. Now, granted, I think the timeline would have actually been more appropriate if they had done this in, I don't know, the early 2000s.
Like maybe
because
2008, somewhere around there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill would have been young enough still. Like, it would have been age appropriate to what the storyline called for, but they wouldn't have been like
80.
60 and 70 years old. Yeah. It would have been exactly what it needed to be. And I think that's one of the things where it was just such a missed opportunity. It's too bad that Lucas didn't sell it off like 10 years earlier. But at the same time, I thought that the stories that they came up with were cool. But again, and remember, I brought this up in another show at some point, where you could actually have taken the same storyline that they came up with 7, 8, and 9, you could have taken some of the characters that were in the sequel trilogy, but you could have, brought them in. Now, of course, as you know, we're going to get into this even more in depth a little later, but I really want to stick with this whole erasing the trilogy thing because I was thinking that it has to be a hoax.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading something on the way in, and
well, what were you reading, and where was it? Like,
it was a couple different sites. I saw one, I think it was on Cinema Blend, if I'm not mistaken, and there was another. Let me see if I still have it, but yeah, they were pretty much saying that it wasn't true, and I mean, you can't do something like that because you're totally So this is on. We got this covered.
You got to be careful with them.
I know, but then there's like
they actually were one of the ones that I think broke the story, and of course I immediately But see, this is the problem, and this is the problem that we have in the whole modern society right now, is the fact that people could say or blog just about anything, and the problem is that legitimate news sources start picking up the story and actually running it. And so now you're going, well, I don't know. But see, what I find really strange about this whole thing, nobody at Lucasfilm is denying anything.
Well, I think that it's like, there's nothing. On one hand, you can look at it from the standpoint of like, okay, this is not even. Is it even worth addressing? Yeah, right.
Like,
it's like, come
so
on, people.
Stupid, but
like, because you think about, like, you've poured like millions into these movies. It's like, okay.
Well, I think we should clarify that they're not necessarily, when we say erased from canon, that's sort of not really true because...
Is it from a certain point of view?
Yeah, well, the whole idea is it's almost like what they did with Legends. And especially if they do this whole world between worlds where, the Force creates this multi-dimensional So this is like an alternate. This is like one possible outcome of everything.
That would work if you explain that from Rise of Skywalker. I mean, not Rise of Skywalker, from Force Awakens.
Yeah, well,
You can't do that now and then saying like, oh, I mean, unless you created. I mean, even if you created a new saga and did 10, 11, and 12, and then you like, oh, the events that you saw, or something where there was like
the
from
only
a different.
the only way that they could do that is what they would have to do is they would have to make a new movie where, maybe it was like like an episode 10 or something, and then something happened where somebody went to the world between worlds, and it's like it just erased.
Or you saw something that was like,
Yeah.
Or somebody came from that universe and was like, wow, that was crazy, So I wonder if I went through here, what would happen? You know what I'm saying? So it's like you almost have to establish that's what took place, because you would have had either to have to done it at Force Awakens, or you would probably have to create either some show.
Well, what you do is you de-age Harrison Ford. You have him waking up like the next morning on Endor going, man, I don't know what was in, some of that celebratory
drink or whatever.
But man, I just had this crazy dream.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's about that's about how ridiculous this whole thing is.
Exactly.
Getting.
And that would just ruin, like everybody was like, okay, come on. Because then if you're going to do that, then if you decided to do a whole new trilogy, you still have Harrison Ford still around. You still have Mark Hamill around. Now you don't have Carrie Fisher.
Right.
So
you saying like in the fake one, you actually have Carrie Fisher, but in the quote-unquote real one, you don't? I mean, that's why it opens up. Like, if she were still alive, I'd say, okay.
You could probably run with that.
Maybe you could do this. The other thing, though, is that I think that it should be said that this, once again, is just opening up a whole nother thing about there's obviously issues going on over there at Lucasfilm.
Yeah, and it just goes back to your whole thing of planning. Now, I would have loved, if they wanted to do a saga, so to speak, I would have done it from the perspective of Bloodline. Like, I would have changed Force Awakens and just made it Bloodline. Because that would have made.
No, the problem is I think that was written afterward, though. But I know what you mean. Well, it's kind of like they could have just done something like that. I mean,
yeah, I'm saying just that would have made more sense. You're showing like, okay, you're trying to rebuild this, and then you have Leia, like, okay, everybody kind of finds out that she's Vader's daughter. Now all this mistrust is going on, blah 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 blah. And then if you want to start bringing in some new people, like a new threat like Thrawn or something like that, and that can segue into that, because it's like, all right, I need a strong rebellion to go against Thrawn, because Thrawn is kind of trying to take over.
Well, and that's another problem with the trilogy, though, with the actual sequel trilogy, is the fact that I get what they were trying to do, but one of the biggest problems, and people have pointed this out, that they really did the same thing with Episode 4, because that starts in the middle of the whole saga, right? So you're dropped in, you see there's this empire, all this stuff, but it's a little bit easier to follow. Whereas with the sequel trilogy, we have this history of these 6 movies behind us. And then all of a sudden they drop us in 30 years later, and it's still really weird, because if you think about it, you don't really see any governing body. You don't even see really a full rebellion type of a thing.
Right.
You know that there's a new republic. You don't see any representation of them. You just hear mention of them when Hosnian Prime was destroyed. Mm-hmm. But you don't really... It was almost like they didn't really clarify enough stuff.
Oh, I guess they wanted to keep with the with the original, I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, just short of having another Star Destroyer,
exactly.
Flying over. But I mean, it's just...
Which you almost kind of had, actually.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
But I think that, and that's the thing. I think if you're going to move away from the Skywalker saga, then you have to do it with the intent of, okay.
But do you really think that that's what they're going to do? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, and again, one of the primary reasons why I put this as our main topic today is because I have gotten so many people either people that normally watch the show or, some of my friends or whatever, coworkers that know I'm really into Star Wars, they have been just like on me about this. And it's like, really? Is this a thing to you? I mean, do you really honestly think they're going to, but they do. And it's kind of like, I wonder how many people out there really think that Disney could do it. And here's the other problem. Because they've made so many boneheaded decisions, they could do something this stupid.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Right. I will say that. That is true.
And that's it. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
But I think they would just torpedo their whole franchise if they did that.
Yeah. It's a huge, huge risk.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that they could, the way they've been spinning it, like, well, it doesn't really erase the thing, so all the billions of dollars it made and all this other stuff, like, it would still have its place, in other words, like, if people want to rewatch it or whatever. But it's like, okay, if you guys decided to actually make a new 7, 8, and 9, first of all, it would have to continue the Skywalker saga.
Well, because here's my thing. One, you even have to establish this whole, because world between worlds thing, because a lot of people who don't even watch Rebels would have never.
It's so funny, man.
Like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah, I've been talking about that, and people are like, the what?
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying. Like, Star Wars is a very vast entity, and the premise, even like I had a conversation with my little brother, and he's like my little brother, but I made a Star Wars reference to the conversation we were talking about, as the whole, actually from a certain point of view reference. And I was using that as an allegory to say something else, but I made the mention, I was like, okay, when Darth Vader, and he's not even a Star Wars fan, but everybody knows the whole Luke, I am your father thing. Like, that's part of pop culture. Like, everybody knows that. Even if you've never watched the movie before, you know that line.
Oh, yeah. Just like, may the force be with you.
Exactly.
Everybody kind of, there's certain little
things. You've never
things
seen Terminator,
phrases.
I'll be back.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Well, it's also because he said that in 100 other movies.
Well, that's true.
But it did start in the Terminator, though.
Exactly.
I'll give you that.
Or Adrian or something like that. Somebody yells out Adrian, everybody's like, oh, Rocky, yeah. I get it. So there's certain things that it's like, okay, so everybody knows there's like, everybody's heard the name Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Princess Leia, Han Solo. Like, these are names that are synonymous with pop culture for eons, for at least the last 30-some years. So there's a framework where you have general fans, people who just go like, okay, you know what? Star Wars is cool. I mean, it's not like, I'm not like this huge giant fan, but it's cool. I'll watch it. I can watch it and it's entertaining to me. Then you have people like us who are like, okay, we're really into it. And then you have those people who are above us who know like the little speck in the background who knows, oh yeah, I know his background too.
It's interesting, hearing you talk and waiting for you to... No, I'm just kidding. No, but as you're bringing all this stuff up, it reminded me that you're still reading The Queen's Shadow, right? Or did you finish it?
I'm still reading it.
Okay.
Yeah, Queen's
Going
Peril.
a little bit...
Queen's
Peril.
Yeah.
Shadow was the first one.
Shadow's the first one. Yeah.
Peril was the one where you're like, all right, I got to read this. Mm-hmm. It is a quicker read, though. This isn't like Jedi Lost where you're still on page like 13 or something.
No.
Okay. Look, I got to check these things.
I know.
I just want to make sure.
Well, school's getting ready to open up. We've been having to do all that professional development crap, so it's
I get that. Well, last time you were almost like halfway through, you said.
Yeah,
so where are you now?
I'm probably like maybe...
This is like a book report.
I know, right? I'm maybe about 70 pages away from being done.
Okay, so that's perfect. Because here's the other thing that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about when you're dealing with this whole, we're going to delete this from canon.
Books.
How's that going to affect the books?
Exactly.
And the comics.
That's
and all the animated series, all the stuff that basically is tied to this.
Exactly.
This is the central foundation for the new canon.
And that's what I was getting to, because like when you're talking about like, all right, you have these various levels of fandom, but then it's like, okay, for the people who are truly the hardcore fans, I'm talking about like our level and then people who are above us.
Yeah.
Like we get, okay, the world between worlds. We understand because we're following everything as much as we possibly can. But let's just face it, there are more people who are general fans of the franchise
Yeah, and your point is basically that
You're
that
leaving. You're
you'd
alienating
have to
them.
totally explain this. Like,
You're alienating
okay,
them.
well, and I think that you brought up the actual main idea behind what they would have to do, and that it goes back to something I've said 1,000 times, where it's like, okay, if you're going to, if something is in a movie, they have to actually introduce the concept in the movie.
Right.
Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be in that same movie. It could have been in an earlier one or whatever. But the point is, if you're going to bring up something in the films, it has to be established in the films.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do this old thing to where, well, yeah, you remember the
Yeah,
the Ewok adventures from like
more
85
information,
or something.
you know.
Yeah. Or, you know that one book that came out like about a couple of months ago? Yeah, well, you got to read that and then you'll be...
Exactly. Play Fortnite if you hear the Emperor's message. Like,
right.
why?
Exactly. It's stuff like that. So, I mean, it's one of those things that, like, look, one of the things that you have to do, especially with something as big as Star Wars has become, is if you're going to introduce something in the movies, then the origins of it, everything has to be
resolved
or explained in that film. You have to explain it in the film.
Yeah.
So now that said, if they wanted to make, and again, this is that theoretical episode 10 we were talking about, which, or maybe 6.5, depending on, where it's going to fall. But if they want, or a standalone, if they wanted to make a standalone movie, or I would even give them a free pass and say, if you bring it up in like The Mandalorian or something, something that's like wildly popular, maybe a Disney Plus series, you introduce the world between worlds there. Okay, now, if you want to pull the whole, hey, we're going to make a new 7, 8, and 9, and it's just kidding, here's the real 7, 8, and 9.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's another thing that's been floating around that's sort of tied to this rumor, too, is that apparently a lot of people have been saying that there is a George Lucas cut of Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, you mean like, yeah, because I remember they did consult him. And
well, not only did they consult him, but I guess he had, like, oversaw, some of the scenes and stuff like that, and there was a lot of concepts that he had that they actually did shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, and I think it made the movie, I don't know if it made it longer or if it was just like there was some different scenes in there or whatever, but apparently this cut actually exists. Now, before everybody out there is going to jump on that and say, well, I don't know, everybody said the same thing about the Snyder cut of Justice League, and now we find out that is actually a thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's real, and it's actually coming on HBO, what do they call it, Max or something? Or HBO?
Yeah, Now or whatever.
Yeah, one of the new one.
Yeah.
And the new streaming service they have, it's coming out next year on this thing. So it is conceivable that there actually really is a George Lucas cut. Now, if that's the case, it's like, okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to release this thing and then say that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? It's like,
and then you're going to confuse fans once again.
You're going to confuse even the hardcores, because it's the hardcore people like us or above that's going to be left when all these people want to come up and bash on Star Wars. We got to explain this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
we
like,
become the mini George Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, Lucasfilm isn't thinking about the fact that the people who really love these stupid products that are making them billions of dollars have to go out and try to explain this crap to people.
Or defend it.
Or defend it. Usually it's defended.
Exactly.
Usually it falls under the category of, okay, because it's gotten to the point now where it's like if you're somewhat of an unwavering fan of Star Wars, it's like it's a reflection on you. Like, people think you're an idiot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, just all of this is just, like you said before, like the books, games, comics, all of that stuff.
That's the thing. That's what I immediately thought of when this story broke. Well, that's why I basically said there's no way in the world, between worlds, that this is going to happen, because it would upset too much, and it would be like, for what? I mean, if you really stop and think about it, what wrong are they trying to right? The movies all made like $1 to $2 billion. Not
only that, I mean, it's like, okay,
do something else.
Yeah, and my thing is just like learn from much like Yoda told you, learn from your failures and, just move on.
Yeah, and I mean, you could even argue that it wasn't a failure, because if you think about it, who are the ones that are whining about this? It's mostly the people like us.
Right.
But even you and I went, okay, We like Force Awakens. Actually, I think that we could say this about every one of the films, just to varying degrees. It's like, okay, we like it. Here's the things that are wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the things that were actually good about it. Okay. Now, you do have some people that, particularly with The Rise of Skywalker, because the problem with The Rise of Skywalker is it tied everything up. So that was the one that was going to really either disappoint people or... But you actually have a thing to where a good chunk of the fans are pretty satisfied.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was a 50-50 split.
Well,
so what wrong are they trying to right?
Well, I think what it is that, once again, it's everybody's trying to... It's like the Kylo. I mean, that's why it's so funny that Kylo's character is who he is, because that's honestly like the personification of Lucasfilm right now. It's like they're trying to relive Darth Vader. They're trying to bring back the magic of the original trilogy instead of just creating great stories. Instead of trying to, we have to compete. We have to be as good as, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. No, just tell a good story. That's what made that.
Tell a good story that feels like Star Wars.
Yeah, and that's what made Star Wars was because before we even knew what a Star Wars was, it was just a great story.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, that was really cool. I like how they explained stuff. It was different. Okay, it pushed the envelope with technology. Great. And like I said, when we talked about Dave Filoni from the gallery and how he explained what George's vision was for Star Wars.
That's the guy they should just give the keys to the kingdom to.
Exactly.
I mean, if you want to give it to Favreau because he technically has more experience or whatever, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But really, those guys, because if you think about it, all the stuff that's working and that's good about Star Wars, those are the ones that are...
Honestly, I would just have Favreau direct because he'd be a better director, and then I'll just have Filoni just create the stories.
Yeah. And again, they could even get like a neutral third party as the head of Lucasfilm. And of course, we're going to go into this a little bit later when we talk about the whole Kathleen Kennedy thing. But they could just get somebody, maybe that's sort of like a neutral third party or whatever, and have, like you said, Filoni control the whole story thing, and then Favreau can actually direct and make the movies.
Mm-hmm.
But, this whole idea, I can't believe... As I was thinking about this, I couldn't believe that I had to even make this a topic. Because at first I was going to make this a Cantina topic.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started thinking about, you know what? This thing is so out of control, and I'm seeing all these YouTube videos on it.
Well, that's another reason. That's another way
this
that
thing
was
is like really moving.
That's another way that's got some traction, though, is from YouTube. That's kind of how this crap started.
Well, sure. I mean,
people
like us that are putting this as our title and
they're
becoming part of the problem.
Well, they're they're like, they did something where it was like you know how to say everything that's what's wrong with Star Wars.
Yeah.
Well, they did ones like the sequel trilogy erased, and this what it's going to be, and I think that's what got people like, oh, almost like that, Jar Jar Binks being like the mastermind behind everything. It's like, oh, it's plausible if you really think about it.
Or Mace Windu is Snoke, and then everybody kind of runs with that.
Exactly, and it's like everybody's kind of thinking that, but it's like, come on, people, like really stop and think about it.
Yeah, but this really isn't plausible. I mean, it's
doable,
but it's not plausible.
When you really think about it, it's like, okay, with all the content and everything that you put out there,
why would you? Yeah, because now again, they could use that argument though for the con side, though, right? So you could say, well, okay, you would just totally destroy the books and all that. There's two things they could say to that. Number one, they could be like, well, we did that when we made the expanded universe Legends and made that like an alternate universe. And I came to find out, this is kind of weird, there's actually new Legends books being written.
Well, I mean, even with that, though, it's kind of like, all right, if you're going to... But see, at least that was older content, though. It was like, okay.
Well, but at the time, though, right? So when Disney bought Lucasfilm,
mm-hmm.
immediately they said, okay, all that is now, it doesn't count. And you got to remember, that was like 20 years of books, comics, games, right out.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But at least they did it with material that was actually legend, though. It's like, it's older. You can't do something you just released like a year ago and then
it was. Because you got to remember that it wasn't that was all the current stuff. And then, like, say in 2012, like, books that were being released that year were instantly nullified.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because now we look at it as old, but it wasn't old at the time. They were constantly coming up with new stories, and okay, this is the next
because
thing.
like, okay, I'm thinking about like Zahn's era, like, but I see what you're saying. Like, anything that's released after that is considered legends.
Yeah, like it's basically
until
like, okay,
they started their new canon.
Pretty much, yeah. It's like as soon as we bought it, now all this stuff, and yeah, I know this book is only 2 months old, but guess what? It's legends.
Yeah.
And it was like the exact same thing. That's one thing that they could say. And then, of course, the other thing that they could say is like, well, you just got through saying that not a whole lot of people are really reading and, only the hardcores or whatever. The general fans, which is where all the dollars are, they don't even know this stuff exists anyway. So who cares?
Well, because your hardcore fans, though, are like but like we just said, like the hardcore fans are the ones who are defending it for the general ones. So it's like, okay, the general ones who, if you change canon and say like, okay, well, 7, 8, and 9 basically didn't exist, then it's like, okay, well,
it is a little,
so now you're almost like asking the people that you said screw you to now say, oh, please help me. No.
Well, and of course the other thing you got to look at as well, and this is like a really big thing, is the fact that one of the things that they were trying to do when they nullified the expanded universe was they wanted to make a more unified canon, because that was the problem. One of the key differences between the expanded universe and the new canon is the fact that the old expanded universe Lucas might say, okay, yeah, this one little plot line or something, we'll consider that canon. Or he might cherry pick from the novels, and like when he put Quinlan Vos in episode 3, or, like a reference to him. And, he did like little things that were actually inventions of the expanded universe, but he canonized them when he put them in the films or in the Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. Well, when Disney came along, and this is one of the things I actually supported, even though a lot of fans, and I was a little disappointed because I loved the stories, not all of them, mind you, but I did love a tremendous amount of those stories. The problem, though, is that you created this new canon specifically to tie to the movies, to tie to the game, to like everything is going to be unified under one umbrella. Mm-hmm. If you take out a big chunk, and we're not saying like, oh, I'm just going to like start over with Rebels or something. I mean, you're talking about saga films. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
That's like a big deal. You can't, and this is one of the things why I wanted our show to be a little bit different from maybe what some of the other shows are doing. This is a little bit of a reality check. Think about it. When people are just freely spreading I hear Disney's going to do this. I don't know. Again, at this point, I wouldn't put past anything, or put anything past these guys, because they have been making some relatively dumb decisions. Now, of course, they've been right-sizing the ship a little bit, like with High Republic. Mm-hmm. They got all the authors together, made a cohesive story. Good. Maybe you'll do that with the next batch of films.
Right.
But we really don't know what's going on over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they just need to focus on the future. In the words of Eckhart,
I was about to say, think
about
the future, Eckhart. I was like, hey, Eckhart, think about the future.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think, you have some great directors, in the pipeline right now. Like Taika Waititi, you got, Filoni, you got Favreau. You got
well, they even had Kevin Feige interested into something.
He's trying to do something.
Who was a guy that they recently announced wanted to do a Star Wars film, and you're like, really? That's the thing. It's like Star Wars is actually bringing some people who, of course, grew up. Crap. Star Wars is a reason why some of these guys got into filmmaking in the first place.
Exactly.
So it's sort of like they're giving back.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think you need to just focus on that instead of trying to bounce back and forth, because once again, you're only going to pollute what's already there. It's just like, okay, you need to be cleaning stuff up going forward, like get that filtering process. So people,
Well, I think they're taking
eventually-
that to another level. It's like, yeah, we're going to clean it up, all right. We're just
they're
going to...
gonna, wipe this thing out. All of them.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I'm not. I don't. This can't happen. It's not going to happen. I really don't. Yeah.
I'll watch like 3 weeks from now, hey, welcome to our show. Well, this week, Disney erased,
I had to do the whole, I was wrong.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine them doing something so stupid. But what about you guys? I mean, if you're watching us live, let us know, chat with us about really anything. You know how it works. Well, pretty much anything you guys start talking about in the chat, we'll shift gears and we'll talk about that too. But, let us know what you guys think. If you're watching the rebroadcast, let us know in the comment section. Let us know, do you guys think that, number one, are they really going to do this? Are they really this desperate and this crazy that they would actually erase this from canon or make it like a World Between Worlds thing? Or do you think like we do that there's just no way that this could happen and that it's just yet another wild rumor that gets started because people wouldn't put Disney passes? This is the reason why stuff like this gains traction.
Why?
Well, because say that this was still under George Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody said, oh, George Lucas is going to erase episodes like 4 through 6. No, he'll tamper with them constantly.
Mm-hmm.
He'll add stuff to them. But if somebody put a rumor like that, everybody would just be like, oh, whatever. That's crazy. But because Disney has made so many stupid mistakes with Star Wars, people are kind of like, well, I don't know. Maybe they will.
Well, yeah, like I said, I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Anything is possible in this day and age, especially with them, but I just...
The only way that I could see it, I will say this. If it meant that they would make Colin Trevorrow's Duel of the Fates, I'd be on board with it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind that. I mean, it's...
I would just say, like, you know what? Sign them on for another film and just have
either
them
that
do
or
something.
why don't you do this? Why don't they just make an animated version of whatever alternate 7, 8, 9 they wanted to do? Because you and I had talked about that too.
Well, just create a whole nother animated series. Like, it doesn't have to be... Like, it's done. That's what I'm just saying. Like, it's done.
Well,
just let it go. Just let it go.
Or
just...
let it go. Take from another Disney film.
Yes,
Frozen.
Which I loathe, but...
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either.
I can't bring myself to watch it.
I can't either, but I have a little cousin who's 6 years old who sings the songs.
And then Frozen 2 came out, and I'm like, man, I really should see Frozen. And everybody's talking about how it's like the best Disney cartoon ever, and I'm like, I don't see it.
It'll never top Lion King.
No, or Beauty and the Beast, or Little Mermaid, or
Aladdin.
All those like classic ones.
Yes.
And I don't even mean the classic ones like your Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and I mean the more
relatively
kind of modern.
Yeah,
but...
relatively modern.
All right, well, you ready to do some battle in our next segment? I almost said it.
Yeah, I know. It's time for Duel of the Fates. All right. So we're here at Duel of the Fates, and I guess we can kind of keep the party going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, all the segments today have a theme.
Yeah.
I also partially did this, too, because this isn't a bad idea considering the way our chats usually go. Now, of course, nobody's actually chatted with us yet tonight, but, it's one of those things that a lot of times I try to keep it to where that way if people were chatting and they wanted to keep stuff going, everything kind of relates. But, yes, this definitely relates to what we were talking about.
So, which would be the better? Which is the better, the Zahn Trilogy or the sequel trilogy?
It's tough. That's a tough call.
Really?
Yeah, I know. You're probably like, okay, dude, you just spent like the last almost
like,
hour
how
bashing this.
This is supposed to be like one of those
trilogy.
Mike Tyson fights. It's over like in 10 seconds.
Like 90 seconds or something. Like Duel of the Fates is exactly like 15 seconds. Like the actual opening music
right.
is longer than the segment. No, I mean, because, and again, yes,
state your position.
Well, I would just say, okay, the Zahn Trilogy. Because the Zahn Trilogy is a great 7, 8, and 9. If they had done it in, say, the mid to late 90s or even early 2000s, I think it would have been just like the prime time, because for the actors, I think that would have just been the prime time to have done this. On the other hand, even though we go on and on about how there was no planning, it was disjointed, on and on it goes, I'm not entirely unhappy with the storyline of the sequel trilogy. And there are elements of the Zahn trilogy that get a little bit, I guess fantastical would probably be the word. You know, where it's kind of like you have these like weird clones and it just sort of goes off because they're books and it's not like they spend a whole lot of time and they bring it back. Because there's actually a segment of that book, I think it's Dark Force Rising, the second book of the series, where Luke, obviously there's his dark side clone, but I think he even flirted a little bit with the dark side in that one too. Now, I know there's the Dark Horse comics that also talk about Luke, you know, in the dark side of the Force or whatever. But, yeah, I mean, there's just some things about the Zahn trilogy that do get a little bit off. Overall, I would definitely say it's a better story. Mm-hmm. It's obviously because it's from the mind of one guy. And then thirdly, besides the cohesion of the whole thing, I think that it would be something that the fans obviously would have been more about. You know, I think that it would have just been if you had taken away, because remember, you do have a thing where you have the stuff that's written, you know, because how a lot of times books, when you actually adapt them to movies, it changes. You have to factor that in too.
Right.
It's just like when we talked about Duel of the Fates. You know, everybody's going on and on about how, well, Duel of the Fates is like way better than
Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, Rise of Skywalker, but it's like, well, yeah, you're saying that based on what you're reading in a script. That's no guarantee that it would have actually been doing it. So we actually have somebody chatting here. Fad3 Posty is basically saying hello to us from Twitch. It's always nice when we have our Twitch viewers, you know, come up.
Twitch families coming.
Yeah, our Twitch family. You know, one of my friends watches us on Twitch, Connor. Mm-hmm. So he might pop up. He's probably listening to it while he's playing a game or something. But, but you know, and then, of course, DP Dishy.
DP.
Our famous chatter from Twitch. He was flying the Twitch banner. So, you know, hello to all of our viewers on Twitch. You know, it's really good to have you guys, you know, watching and popping in and chatting with us.
Yeah. I think I'm definitely going to go with the Zahn Trilogy.
You're going to go with the Zahn Trilogy?
Yeah. Simply because, one, just overall the better story. I think that's what drives Star Wars. I think that's what makes Star Wars the powerhouse that it is. And then I think it's one of those things that it's the natural evolution, I guess, if you will, of those characters. You know.
Okay, I will go with you on that one because there's one of the things, like right out of the gate, first scene. I think it was the first scene in Heir to the Empire, the first book. Mm-hmm. Right away, the way they handle things, I think, was a lot better. Like, for instance, Luke basically was, I don't remember what he was doing, but he had this, Obi-Wan basically visited him as a Force ghost and was like, hey, listen, I'm going to have to go now. You know, like he advised him on a couple of things and then was just basically like, okay, that's it. You're going to be on your own. I've done pretty much all I need to do. It's time for you to carry things on. And that felt more like Star Wars to me. That actually, you know, rather than having these Force ghosts like manifest themselves physically, because again, the problem with the sequel trilogy is they create more questions than they answer.
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like watching Clone Wars again, I finished it, by the way. And
yeah, I'm still on season 4.
It's all right. I'm still waiting.
I'm watching pretty much at the rate that you're reading. So.
Yeah, I know, right? So, you know, but I forgot how, like, really that whole arc where Yoda is actually learning how to become a Force ghost, and that whole like training thing, and I'm just like, does everybody have to go through it, or does he
yeah.
You know, because I'm like, that was just kind of grueling, just on his own. I'm like, well, geez, like when do people have time to really do this? But
especially the war going on.
I know, right? So, you know, just that whole dynamic though, but watching, you know, them as Qui-Gon is kind of trying to instruct Yoda on how to become a Force spirit, and then of course those weird lady are trying to teach Yoda lessons and stuff like that. That evil Yoda was creepy. That was really creepy. But I just think that, like, yeah, when you're starting to look at things about the Force, I mean, they answer some things, but then, like you said, they did create a lot of questions. Now, I've always felt like Luke, Obi-Wan, Yoda, with them being as powerful as they were in living form, I should say, I can understand why they'll be maybe that much stronger where they can actually physically.
Well, because like you had pointed out once when we were discussing, because there was a whole string of shows that we started talking about the nature of the Force and all this stuff. And you're right. I mean, if they're going and they're being one with the Force or whatever, it's like, well, it does stand to reason now. They don't have the physical limitations anymore.
Right.
That's why, again, the concepts that they brought up in the sequel trilogy, I could totally hang with them. I just think that it was done more Star Warsian, if that's a word, in those books.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. I think that...
And don't forget that Lucas had to actually go over the outlines himself and approve everything. And I think that that's another major...
It's quality control. No different than when Steve Jobs was over at Apple. You know what I'm saying? You got a better Apple product.
Oh, man,
because...
yes, I miss Steve Jobs.
I know. Because it's like, yeah, you're starting to
goodness.
see, like, the further we get away from his design and how his... You know,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I still like a lot of the Apple stuff. And I'm still kind of, into that whole architecture.
Right.
And it works. It's just there's a lot of like really stupid stuff that I know Steve Jobs would never have let go.
And that's how we feel about Lucasfilm.
Right.
There are some things that we feel like, okay, as we don't like Lucas.
Kathleen Kennedy is the Tim Cook of Lucasfilm.
Yes.
Bunch of bells and whistles and like
Yep.
really cool stuff, but at the end of the day, it's like you kind of want Jobs back.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that when you have to look at the story, and that's something like with anything, that's what drives it. And I think the story of the Zahn, Luke is, of course, he eventually ascends to this like grandmaster type level. You get to see that, and that appeases the fans because they know how powerful he is, and you really don't get a chance to see that.
Yeah,
and then
that's-
but
see, that's one of the things. Now you swing that back to almost a sequel trilogy for me because, don't get me wrong, I love, super powerful Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that there's a lot that they could have done. But in a way, in the expanded universe, they kind of overpowered him. They almost made him a god. I mean, that's why they had to create the Yuuzhan Vong. They had to create something that were his just massive force powers and abilities and control and all that and knowledge couldn't touch it.
But see, I think that's what's awesome though, because it's like that's something you've never seen before. Like because you've always had like, okay, it's the same thread with everything,
but I mean,
like
that
equal
whole
light,
astral
equal dark.
projection, though, you never saw that before.
Well,
either.
no, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying that they didn't show Luke at a high level, but you saw that at the very tail end of it.
Well, here's what
He's walking around disillusioned the whole time. He's fighting Rey with a stick. I mean, it's like, come on now. Like, this is Luke Skywalker here. And that's what I'm saying. I understand why fans...
Yeah, and he was kind of...
Like, he was grumpy the whole... I mean, I get it. Like, I understand the direction. And the way they portrayed it was brilliant. I mean, don't get me wrong. But I think for the fans, it's like, okay, we've been waiting. That's almost like if we see this Top Gun movie and we don't see, like... Maverick get into the cockpit until like the last second of the movie. Like, you're going to be irritated. Like, it's
and
Maverick.
Even then, you find out it's a flight simulator. Or something.
And it's like
he wasn't even really there.
Exactly. Like, it's like I waited 30 years for the sequel, and this is all. And I understand why the fans have that reaction. So that's what I'm saying. Like, even the fact that Luke is a god almost practically in the Zahn Trilogy, that's fine with me because you understand why, though.
Well, and actually, in Zahn's defense, he wasn't quite godlike yet. That actually happened, because don't forget, the Zahn's Trilogy, the one we're actually talking about, because he did actually write several books in the expanded universe, including something that I think is called the Thrawn Trilogy. A lot of times people, they'll say the Thrawn Trilogy when they're talking about this particular, the 7, 8, and 9, but I think he actually wrote another one that was called, well, and then, of course, there's the Thrawn Trilogy of the new canon as well.
Right.
But, I mean, even in old canon, I think that they had, it's like Thrawn's this and Thrawn's that or something like that. But, yeah, in Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, The Last Command, these are the books that we're talking about. In none of those was he really too overpowered? That came later on.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Like, even if you did show him, though, at that level, let's just say you did. Okay, fine. But the fact is, like, okay, that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, we're used to seeing a Sith Lord equal light, equal dark. Okay, cool. That's what we're used to. But now that, okay, Palpatine and Vader are gone, like, who's going to stop Luke? Because now you have the Superman complex. But now you have a system where it's like, okay, well, we exist in a space where the Force doesn't exist anymore. Whoa. Like, that's because now Luke has to, it's almost like Batman without his utility belt. Now he has to figure out, or Superman without the yellow sun. Now he has to figure out, well, can Superman really fight for real? Or does he just and that's one of the things I love, whenever they show Superman without, his powers, that, like, it's almost like he can't fight anyway until, people like Batman and, can kick the crap out of him, because Batman knows all these different versions of martial arts. Superman is powerless against it when he doesn't have his power. So I'm thinking, like, this will be very interesting to see a Luke Skywalker be challenged in that way. But then it'll also be cool to see kind of how, all right, he has his godlike ability. We can see some of the things that he can do. Maybe pull a Star Destroyer out the sky, send his lightsaber through a room and kill everybody in the
and these are the things that he did later on.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, he did some really cool things in the Zahn Trilogy as well. But it just wasn't too. See, everything in the Zahn Trilogy felt more like Star Wars to me.
Yeah.
And even though I can hang with what they did with the sequel trilogy, I think that it made more sense in context in the Zahn Trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the sequel trilogy, the problem with that is this. I mean, you could obviously see that there was no direction. Like, okay, you start off good, Force Awakens, we're rocking and rolling, but by the time we get to Last Jedi, you're like,
yeah, because really the worst thing that people say about the Force Awakens is its derivative.
Yeah,
that's pretty much like the worst criticism it gets.
Yeah, but
for the most
like,
part.
okay, you got some new characters, you got somebody that's trying to be like, all right, another Vader, but he's kind of like has anger management issues or something like that. So I mean, it's kind of a cool, almost like a teenish version of the original New Hope in a way. Like,
basically a New Hope with millennials.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, no, I don't want to do this, and he's like slamming stuff all over the place.
But I have to say, I mean, I still think that Kylo Ren is one of the coolest characters that they came up with. And I mean, I know a lot of people that
like a high-strung Sith Lord, that's hilarious.
Really, exactly. And it's funny because I kind of fall into the minority when it comes to that opinion, because there's a lot of people that really just think he's this whiny whatever. But I'm like, he's granted, yeah. I mean, I get it, but I think people underestimate how powerful he really is.
Yeah.
They look at, like, I mean, yeah, he's not going to take out Vader in his wildest dreams, but, and maybe Dooku could probably take him out too.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, he's
because
still...
he wasn't even a Sith Lord. That's the thing.
Well...
I mean, he might as well have been, but he wasn't.
I mean, and that's the thing that, again, this sort of shows you where they had some problems, because if Palpatine created Snoke...
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now Snoke is training Kylo. They're essentially Sith Lords, and I mean, if they just don't have the name, it's like, well, where does all that? I don't know. It gets like really crazy. But now here's the thing. So both of us, I think, agree that the Zahn Trilogy would be the way to go, right? That's the best in this matchup.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you have direct them? Well, J.J. Ryan Johnson.
No. No.
I mean, I would, you know what? I'd like to see Jon Favreau do 7 to establish the whole thing. That's actually kind of tough.
Spielberg,
yeah. Now, is this going to be one of those things where are you going to cheese out and say, okay, well, yeah, he could just do all three? Or would you give Spielberg a particular one? And if so, which one? And I realize up front how unfair this question is, considering you haven't read the books since like the 90s.
Yeah. I'm going to say, it's Heir to the Empire. Last Command was the last one, of course.
Right. Dark Force Rising was the middle
Rising.
one.
That's the one I would have him do.
Yeah. Because it very much is like the Empire Strikes Back of the three.
And I need that anchor right there. I need that experience. I need
See,
that.
I could go for Favreau for 7. Or Heir to the Empire. Because I like what he's done with The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could actually capture the essence of Heir to the Empire really well. And Spielberg, I think, would be a lot. Because really, he should have directed one of the prequel movies.
Yeah.
And he almost did.
Yeah.
And he actually did direct a couple of scenes in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, that's one I wanted to see him do.
Yeah, me too. So, I mean, that would be, that would be cool. So he's a no-brainer. He's got to be in there. Man.
The Last Command.
Yeah.
I'm almost really want to give either I almost want to give Trevorrow a shot, honestly.
I could see that. I could see Trevorrow doing it. Given the story and how he was at least planning on doing his Duel of the Fates movie, my attitude changed. It was funny because I remember when Trevorrow was kicked off and JJ was announced, we were popping the champagne corks.
Yep.
Like, oh, thank goodness.
Well, yeah, but that's because that's because it was like it was a safe bet.
So, right, but I mean, it's just so funny how it's
Yeah.
just kind of like, well, let's take another look at that Trevorrow script again. It's just funny how that works sometimes.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, or I would even give Ron Howard
Ron Howard would be a good choice
for
on
Last
one of them.
Command.
Because a lot of the guys that have been doing, or even a lot of the Mandalorian directors, Taika Waititi obviously would be a good choice.
Yep.
I could see.
I could see Benioff and Weiss.
Yeah. Actually, they might not be a bad choice for that, but I would still like to see those two tackle some Old Republic stuff. I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
that would just be.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That source material is made for them.
Oh, totally. But I'm just saying, like, if we're just spitballing here.
Yeah, if we're just throwing people out there.
Yeah.
Because it's really difficult. Because of course, a lot of times you would be tempted to just go with a lot of these tried and true guys that have either already done something or, Star Wars related. I mean, or if
I would just pick Benioff and Weiss just because of the Thrawn vibe. I see them because they're good with militarian type of entities.
Sure.
So I can see him like them running like the new empire or like making Thrawn like this grandiose, Yeah, that would be sweet.
No, that would be. I'd be down with that. But what about you guys? Do you guys think that, are you more on the side of the sequel trilogy? I recognize that maybe a lot of you haven't read the Zahn Trilogy, and this is a weird recommendation. I would say that if you haven't read this trilogy, which would be Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command, they were essentially the first novels that were written. The first Star Wars novels that were actually, they weren't technically the first because you had like Splinter of the Mind's Eye and stuff that was written during the time the original trilogy was being made. But once Star Wars was done, it was in 1991. I don't know if Zahn approached Lucas or what. I don't remember. But basically, they'd worked out a thing. He wrote what would have been 7, 8, and 9. And then that just spawned the entire, what ended up becoming Legends.
Yep.
But the whole expanded universe.
Jedi and everything
Yep.
else.
It was all established by Timothy Zahn.
Yep.
And so I would say that even though they're not canon, and even though, who knows, they could be in like a year. But I would recommend actually going and reading those books. Because even for me, I plan to go back and read the Darth Bane and Darth Plagueis books, even though they're legends. everybody keeps raving about how great they are. So it's like, well, maybe I'll take a second look at those. But, for those of you who have read the Timothy Zahn trilogy, let us know in the comment section below or chat with us live while we're on, and let us know which one you would prefer. Do you like the Zahn trilogy better? Sequel trilogy? Which one is the best follow-up to Return of the Jedi, basically? All right. Ready to go to the Cantina?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it. All right, so we got our first news story in the Cantina. This is where we talk about just pretty much anything that, it's kind of our aggregate Star Wars thing, like anything that pops up or anything we feel like talking about.
Yep.
We grab drinks and, talking to the Cantina. So we got a new Disney Plus series, it looks like.
Finally, something's actually announced.
We
that's
know
what it
things.
is.
Exactly. There's like so many things they've been talking about. Oh, there's this, there's that. Nothing has been officially announced. Mm-hmm. We still don't know where the films stand. No,
we have no. Even some of the TV shows, although there has been some talks about the Kenobi thing, which has been cool.
Yeah, I heard about that too. That there's some movement on that, and that's cool. But this Bad Batch thing.
Yeah, what do you think about it?
I'm actually kind of excited about it.
Okay.
At first it was going to be one of those things where I'm like when I first heard it, I'm like, I don't know. But then when I read that it was going to obviously take place after Revenge of the Sith, probably closer to episode 4, started getting me thinking, okay, here's these rogue clones that now have to try to make sense of the universe in a post-Republic, now Empire world, and it's kind of like they can't go around. I wouldn't think they could go around in their clone armor.
No, because that would just be obvious.
Yeah, and that would be something that the Empire would want to just stamp out right away. Mm-hmm. So it would be really interesting to me. Granted, I would have preferred it had been somebody like Rex or, some of these other clones that we've gotten to know.
Cody,
Cody and all those guys. But at the same time, I do think it's an interesting thing of what do the clones do after the whole Clone Wars is over? You now have, some of them became stormtroopers. But, if you're asking, I'm looking forward to it, but I would have preferred he had chosen something else.
Yeah. So pretty much, what our article says is members of the Bad Batch are a unique squad of clones who vary genetically from their brothers in the clone army. Each possess a singular exceptional skill, which makes them extraordinarily effective soldiers and a formidable crew. In the post-Clone Wars era, they will take on daring mercenary missions as they struggle to stay afloat and find purpose.
Which, of course, is essentially the Clone Wars, or the clone version of The Mandalorian.
Yeah, essentially.
That's essentially what The Mandalorian's about. But I would have preferred more stories in that post-Return of the Jedi world, though. Or maybe pre-Force Awakens world. See, that's what I would have liked.
Now, I could see if this might not be that bad.
Oh, look, you're changing your mind. See, look, he reads the article, actually, and changes his...
No.
It's like, now that I know something about it.
No, actually, something just hit me. Ouch. But
it might be a tick.
It's an earlier joke, guys.
Yeah.
Anyway, but no, I just thought about it because, okay, so this is taking place post Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. So I wonder how close this is to Rebels.
Well, see, that's
because
the thing.
I'm wondering now, because with Ahsoka on the run, okay, and Ahsoka used to be, so do they team up at some point and kind of, because they don't have the chip apparently. So do they now hang out with Ahsoka now?
Well, that's actually the big question on everybody's mind is, okay, you have a period of 19 years between episodes 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. So where does it fall? Is it going to be a little bit earlier?
Yeah.
Is it really just post Clone Wars? or is it a little bit closer to episode 4?
Right.
Which I would like to see that, because I would really like to see where the clones actually could fit in that world.
No.
My gut tells me it's going to be closer to 3, though.
So I feel like it's going to take place in between, like smack dab in the middle between 3 and Rogue One. I have a feeling that it's going to be kind of like in that. So maybe
even 3 and Solo.
Oh yeah. Well, Solo. I forgot what.
Solo was like 3 or 4 years or something, or 5 years, before Rogue One.
Okay, yeah. So I could see it in that space. Yeah, right there. That makes the most sense to me, because then, like, now you can deal with Ahsoka, what's going on in the galaxy. You know, just scrambling. You know, and I can see them kind of being like the whole. And they're almost like the A-Team. We always said that anyway. Like when we first saw that episode, we said like they're like the A-Team.
That's why I think it could actually be a really cool adventure series.
Yeah, and I think if they actually...
I'm excited about it, and if Filoni's doing it, the
Yeah.
stories are going to be cool. It's just where it fits in the timeline is really going to basically be the barometer for my excitement level.
Yeah.
You know, because if it's closer to 4, I'm going to be really amped up for this. If it's closer to 3, I'll give it a shot. I'll mildly look forward to it, but it's not something that I was really clamoring for.
Because they're mercenaries. I could see this kind of like being really interesting, because I'm just thinking about some couple of plots. Okay, you could have, like, let's say an early Rebel Alliance or whatnot, using them for various things to kind of combat the growing empire.
Well, it kind of makes you wonder then, does it fit more in the Cassian Andor time period? Because we still don't really know technically how far back that series is going to go.
That's true. And then, but you also have, like, maybe Separatists or maybe the new forming empire could actually use them against the rebels too. So it's like they're playing like both, because they're mercenaries. Is like, look, it's whoever pays. It's almost like a bounty hunter.
Sure.
It's like whoever's paying the top dollar for this. I don't care. That's the only thing that matters to me.
Well, and it makes you wonder too, are they going to run into the bounty hunters?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like they're going to...
your Aura Singhs, your Boba Fett's, your Bosks, all those guys, IG-88s, IG-11.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that those stories... and I can see kind of like I said, it's like the A-Team, and I think that will be an interesting.
Well, hopefully they're better shots than the A-Team.
Well,
A-Team's more like stormtroopers.
I know.
It's
right?
one of the things that my dad used to when I was a kid, and we would watch it. You know, of course, I was loving it. I was all about it. You know, my dad would be like, "All these guys are like, they got all these machine guns, and they're shooting everywhere, and nobody gets hit." And I'm like, yeah, but, you know, because I'm like, oh, these guys are so good. No, they're not. They can't even shoot. They got a machine gun, and they can't even hit anything.
And mind you, they're like, you know, special forces,
right?
Ex-special forces guys. Is that it's like, really?
But yeah, it's like it's a network TV show. I mean, nowadays they'd be, you know, heads would be exploding, and
like that new one with they had with Liam Neeson and Rampage Jackson and
yeah.
That was cool.
See, I wish they had actually continued that series.
Me too.
You know, that would have been cool. But I don't know. I just think that it makes sense because they did introduce the Bad Batch, and they were popular with a lot of Star Wars fans.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense to latch onto them and to move on. It's just that, I don't know. I'm really starting to get a little bit worn out with the time period between 3 and 4.
Yeah.
Not so much because I don't think that there's good stories that could be told there. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot, actually.
Yeah.
But it's just that post-episode, like between 6 and 7, that's like 30 years. You know, so that's like another 11 years. Plus, it's just, I think that that's really for another time period that I would love to see, believe it or not, is between 4 and 5.
Yeah. But see, I think the cool thing is, too, if you wanted to do a post-Jedi thing, That would be awesome, just simply because you still have Mark Hamill, who still can do his voice.
Right.
You still got Harrison, who can still do his voice, so he doesn't have to worry about, like, actually acting the role of Han Solo. He can just lend the voice and then go off and do whatever, serious acting he wants to do. And then you can find someone who kind of sounds like Carrie Fisher.
Sure. I mean, they do that anyway.
Yeah. So it's like, all right, then you can kind of continue those in the animated series, and that would be awesome.
That would be cool.
And then that way you can
that's
tell,
what I'm saying. I mean,
you
that
can
would
tell
be
those tales of, okay, what happened when post Return of the Jedi, what was Luke doing, and
yeah, the New Republic. I mean, there's just so many things that they could do. It's like, or how you brought up Bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
Just turn that into a animated limited series or something, or even better, Disney Plus.
Well, yeah, that's like, if they made it look like the Clone Wars, I'll be all about it.
Sure. Yeah, especially like season 7 of the Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Kazi wrote in on our Facebook group, which is Head to Head a Star Wars Community, by the way. Anybody, if you guys follow Facebook at all, check us out there. We continue a lot of these discussions there. But he wrote in, and he was talking about, how he had just finished season 7 and about how, man, it's like, it was so cinematic and so cool. And, I'm like, well, yeah, they definitely, like, I think they even did a whole special on that where they were talking about, how they went
even
for
music.
even more production value and stuff. And the technology has gotten to the point where it's cheaper. They could do it. So, yeah, I'd be all about something that was in that style.
Totally.
Well, of course, they would be saying, well, we're giving it to you, the Bad Batch. And the characters are cool. I just think, again, it's...
I mean, like I said, I agree with you. Like, although the Bad Batch would be cool, it would be entertaining. I think we could be able to tell good stories, no doubt, because Filoni's a genius at that. But I think that why are we focusing on these group of clones that popped into we didn't even know about until season 7 at the beginning? They had
not true. Because if you remember, they actually introduced them back in like season 3. There was that episode where they were trying to, train, and they were running into that old custodian guy. That was the Bad Batch. Now, granted, I don't know if it was the exact same characters, but they were the Bad Batch. So, but I mean, that notwithstanding, that's just like one additional episode. I mean,
yeah, it's like we didn't really care. I mean, they didn't focus on them like that. So my thing is like, okay, why should we care about them that much when Luke, Leia, and Han are like, you have, like you said, all this time that's going on between from Return of the Jedi up until Force Awakens.
Well, here's a bunch of other series that I wouldn't mind seeing. If you're going to do this whole animated thing, how about giving us, like, the Darth Bane stuff and how he came up with the Rule of 2 and, maybe some Jedi Sith Wars, or there's like a gazillion other storylines I could think of that would be more compelling than the Bad Batch.
Exactly. Definitely.
But do you think that these guys are ever going to make their way into either a live-action series or a movie?
It probably depends on how well it catches on. If it catches on with the kids and even some young adults,
Mandalorian season 4.
Right. I could see it happening, unfortunately.
Well, it's interesting, too, because they could actually expand it. Like, for instance, take the Mandalorian. We're introduced to Moff Gideon. Okay, cool character. Now, from a lot of the interviews that he's been given, though, it turns out he might actually be Force sensitive. And that we might actually see some Force use from him, and which would make sense because that would be another reason to bring Ahsoka and people like that into it.
Right.
But my point is that you actually have this guy that essentially was just this really cool high-ranking official, and now you're expanding his story. Maybe this Bad Batch series, they could expand these guys' stories to the point where, they might be of interest. I don't know.
That's true.
Well, what about you guys? What do you think? You looking forward to the Bad Batch series? Do you think that maybe they should have done something else? Hint, hint.
Nudge, nudge.
Or do you think that this is the path they should go on? It was a good, compelling thing. Let us know in the comments section or chat with us live. All right, what do we have next?
Next, we have something that you've been kind of been championing lately,
Oh, yeah.
Star Wars horror films. So,
yeah. Finally. It's funny because I read about this.
Well,
and
not
I'm
a
like,
film. I'm sorry, a book.
Yeah, it's a book. But this makes me wonder, can a film be too far behind? Because this whole concept where I started talking about Star Wars stuff being genre specific.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it sounds stupid, but, as an example, like a Star Wars romantic comedy or a Star Wars. Why can't you just have the typical genres that we have now in the Star Wars universe? I mean, as a side note to that, being laid up because I haven't been feeling well, holding my own right now, but it's kind of tough. But I ended up watching Marriage Story because it starred Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, yeah, I got to see this. It's kind of like a total Kramer versus Kramer, but everybody was talking about how the acting is amazing. It's nominated for all these, awards and stuff. And it was. It was absolutely, number one, the most realistic breaking down of a marriage type of a thing ever that I've seen on film. And it was just superbly acted by both actors. But it was weird because you have it's like, okay, so Kylo Ren and Black Widow are married, and her divorce lawyer is played by Laura Dern, who is Holdo. I mean, it's just like
He's waiting for all right, she's gonna whip out a gun and start shooting at Kylo. Kylo's gonna whip out a lightsaber.
It's just like, and it's funny because especially with Adam Driver, I just have a really hard time not seeing him as Kylo Ren.
Yeah,
because he's just so distinct looking.
Yeah.
Like Scarlett Johansson,
Yeah.
I knew her before the whole Black Widow thing, and she's played in so many different roles. I don't necessarily go to that right away. But with him, except in Logan Lucky, I do. Mm-hmm. But the point is that I'm trying to remember where I was even going with this. Oh, it's because it just made me think because, okay, you have this prominent Star Wars actor, two of them actually in this movie. Mm-hmm. I was waiting for Billy D. Williams to play the neighbor or something. I was
hilarious.
You could actually have a movie that's similar to this, but set in the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. These genre-specific things. So now, and I brought up the whole horror movie thing at one point, and then there was that one story that we covered a while back where they were thinking of doing some Hoth, thing with. I think it was supposed to be The Thing or something. Maybe a Wampa would be in it, or I don't remember what it was. But it was something along those lines. Now they've got this new Dark Legends book. And I think that they've done this series before, but essentially...
It's 6 stories that they have, 6, Star Wars tales and ghost stories that have been written. And I guess it kind of takes place on different planets, and you're running into different types of actual force spirits and ghosts as far as the Night Sister type stuff. And you got...
I'm totally thinking of that Billy D. Williams' Harvey Dent thing, the Ghosts and Goblins.
Yeah, and you got that. You got all these Sith spirits flying around. You got some of these weird beasts that live on these planets, which those things are freaky within and of itself. You're looking at those raptors and a rancor. We talked about this before, and
I would have just
the
gone
rancor
into shock if I had seen one of these things up close.
Yeah, exactly. You think about the rancor that Luke went against. I'm like, yeah, I would have passed out.
Can you imagine if a Wampa came after you?
Man.
It's just some of these things, even the more benign things like Tauntauns are a little freaky looking if you don't know what they are.
Whatever worm thing that grabbed Luke in the garbage disposal. Garbage.
Or that stupid snake creature that Rey healed.
Oh, yeah, that was freaky. Yeah,
I'd be like, I'd be right there with Poe, man, and blast that thing.
Lightsaber in the heck out of that
it's
thing.
In pain. Well, it's going to be a more pain. I'm going to put it out of its misery.
Force choke it or something.
We're going to the same place, just different ways of getting there. And that's the thing. But it's exactly, if you stop and think about how many of these creatures that are in the Star Wars universe, even the benign ones, that are actually terrifying looking. What if you saw a bantha up close?
Yeah,
you wouldn't know what that thing was going to do to you.
Well, and that's the thing. In this particular series of stories, one of the things that says characters get their comeuppance when people who dabble in the dark side get more than they bargain for.
It's kind of like those movies where, people are breaking out the Ouija board and then they
Yeah,
actually
and
summon something. And
exactly. And I could totally see something like that. Like, you read some weird incantation or something like the Night Sisters left behind or whatever. And now all of a sudden,
like Bane's like coming
Darth
at you,
Maul is chasing you.
Exarchun or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, now how the heck do I deal with this?
Yeah, well, see, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, is the fact that this to me is a precursor because, again, I don't think this thing's going to sell millions of copies or anything like that, but
No, it's made for the young adult era. So like,
it does show, though, that they're starting to really think along these lines about genre-specific Star Wars stories.
I'm glad they're doing some thinking.
Well, because and planning.
Right,
because that's the thing that I always thought all these years, because, like I said, the expanded universe, all this, been following this since 91. And I always thought that it was a shame. I thought this actually, one of the things that I was thinking back when, George Lucas was still firmly in control and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I even began to have conversations like this after we met, was it would be cool if Lucas would allow other directors or writers or whatever to make Star Wars movies that were independent of his, but either make them out of the expanded universe books, like based on those, adapt them, or, come up with some original stories. And that's why when Lucasfilm bought Disney in 2012, we really got excited because it's like, wow, I mean, all these people can now contribute and make their own Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that this is another example of what good could come out of it if you go, hey, let's take a genre that we usually do, a thriller, a political thriller, a horror film, a comedy or romantic comedy, a legal drama, I don't know, like a procedural, anything, mystery, whatever it is, like all the genres that are normal movies. But what if you set these in the Star Wars universe?
Yeah.
I think that would just be a really cool, like what if you had a serial killer on the loose?
Yeah, I mean, and running through the streets of Coruscant,
right.
like, especially in the underworld of Coruscant, I mean, you could totally, you would see that even in the Clone Wars, like, okay,
Or maybe it's not even as, because the only problem with Coruscant is kind of big. You wouldn't necessarily, but if it was like
well, that's what I'm saying, like, you want to do
sort of
like a mystery.
town or something,
Well, yeah, but like, even in Coruscant, like, okay, if you have a serial killer on the loose, it's a big city. I mean, the whole city is the whole planet is almost like a city. Mm-hmm. But I think that would be even just a greater challenge, though, because now you got to try to figure out, like, okay, you don't have the Jedi to actually help with this stuff because this is taking place in the underworld, where they're usually up top taking care. And that's one of the things that they brought up in season 7 of Clone Wars is that, like, yeah, the Jedi really rarely come down here. We're down here to fend for ourselves, and I
did really enjoy the whole Coruscant underbelly storyline. And
even like when they went that situation when they thought Obi-Wan had died, they had killed Obi-Wan, and so they had to kind of stage the whole thing, and then Anakin's like really upset. He's going down there trying to figure out and asking questions of people, and so I mean, I think that would just be cool too. I mean, you could do it on Coruscant because it's big enough, and you got all these different crime syndicates, so you can do like a lot of.
That's the other thing. You could do a heist type movie, like an Italian Job, Ocean's 11, that kind of thing. You could do like a gangster thing. Like imagine Martin Scorsese, directing, like a Hutt gangster film or something.
Yeah, it's like Hoodlum or something.
Yeah, or The Irishman, which is another movie I recently finally, because it's one of those things where it's like, man, this thing's like 3.5 hours. I don't know if I want to, but man, what an amazing movie that was. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's like, what if you had that set in the Star Wars universe instead of the mob? It was maybe like Crimson Dawn or something. You know what I mean? It's like those are the kinds of things that I would love to see.
Definitely.
So who knows? I'm hoping that this is the first step. Now, when's the first one going to be released?
Let me see.
That was one thing that I missed when I was reading the article. Because it actually sounds like a really cool series of books to check out.
Yes, I think it's like one, I don't know if it's just like one big book that has 6 different stories in it.
or if it's going to be like
Or just
one story. Well, first of all, it is an actual book, right? It's not like a graphic novel or a comic or anything.
Let me see.
1 second.
Oh,
Almost there.
let's see.
Because that's one of the things that I would like to see, too, is even if they don't do this in the movies, if they just do this as like a series of books.
So it's an anthology that's coming out July 28th.
Oh, not too long from now. Like another couple weeks.
Yep.
Okay. Well, definitely a couple weeks, guys, pick it up. Let us know in the comments section or the chat when we do our show that week or whatever, what you guys think. I'm definitely going to be picking that up. I still need to try to read Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril, though.
Yeah.
But, this book, I mean, come on. A Star Wars horror-ish type of thing,
Yeah.
I got to check it out.
Oh, of course.
I gotta
That's also
check
one
it
of your
out.
favorite genres anyway. So
Yeah. And I mean, I think that,
in Star Wars,
again,
so it's
in
like
Star Wars, this is going to be really cool.
it's match made in heaven.
Yeah. All right, so what do we got next?
Next, we get to deal with the boss lady.
Yes.
Is Kathleen Kennedy stepping down?
I hope so.
Oh, God, hope so.
And it's too bad. I hate to say that because she really is one of the best producers in Hollywood.
Sure. I just think that she's just not fit for Star Wars anymore.
The problem and I've said this on a million different shows, at least all the recent ones that we've done, is the fact that being a great producer does not necessarily mean you're a great studio head.
True.
There's a different tool set you need for that. There's
Absolutely.
a different management style. There's, as a producer, you're actually trying to give your directors and your team and everything, like everything that they need and all that. As a studio head, it's almost like the opposite of that. You have to be the gatekeeper. You have to make sure that things are on budget. You have to learn to say no. You have to trust your creative team. There's a lot of things, and she's just not... I mean, on one hand, it's like, yes, you can say that, okay, Star Wars under you has been financially successful.
Yes.
But I think that that's going to reach the plateau now because Solo didn't make as much. It's considered the first Star Wars flop. And then Rise of Skywalker, while it did make a tremendous amount of money, still underperformed considering their expectations.
Right.
So I think that the time is to go. And there's rumors that Star Wars Celebration, they moved to 2022 because her contract expires in 2021, and they wanted to actually move it ahead to where they can appoint a new person. So...
Who'd you put?
I think I would... So, and I started to say this at the beginning of the show, is the fact that they could put a neutral third party, somebody who's experienced in running, as long as that person wasn't also... Because this is a problem with Kathleen Kennedy's leadership style, was that she tried to almost manage everything. She was trying to be everything. And number one, she wasn't even really that up on everything Star Wars.
Right.
And it's funny because a lot of people would say things like, oh, well, that's because, she's running the business side, whatever. Hey, look, Filoni, look at how much knowledge he has about it. Favreau, who's just like a fan, but he's also a director. It's like these guys, you could be a Star Wars fan guy and still be, in charge or whatever. So it's like I would put Filoni in charge of the story group and basically make him kind of like Star Wars' creative director.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to go through him. The story group reports to him. Directors, any movie, he basically is a guy that'll greenlight it. He can work with the studio head. They agree. Okay, now he's kind of overseeing everything. That's how I would do it. I don't think he has enough experience to be a studio head.
Right.
So I don't think that it's feasible because a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, hand him the keys to the Lucasfilm kingdom. It's like, well, there's more to being a studio head than just making good
cartoons,
movies and stuff. Yeah. You have to actually, have a little bit of that, but they don't have to have somebody necessarily that's like super. They just need somebody that's good at the job that can steer the ship.
So in my world, I would have Favreau as kind of the, I guess, I don't know what the title would be, but you pretty much like you find the directors, like the talent search, almost like put him as that, like finding the talent as far as like directors and things like that. I would make Filoni, same thing as you said, executive producer, creative director. But my studio head would probably be Pablo Hidalgo.
I'd go with Kevin Feige.
I just feel like he has his hands full with Marvel, though.
He does, but Marvel's sort of winding down a little bit. And I think that he could jump onto this franchise and do the same things that he did
for Marvel.
And not to mention the fact that, lest anybody freak out about it, Feige understands that Star Wars is different from Marvel.
True.
Unfortunately, Kathleen did not understand that.
True.
He gets that. And he's a big Star Wars fan. In fact, he's a bigger Star Wars fan than he is a Marvel fan. Mm-hmm. So imagine what he would do. So I think that he would be... Plus, he actually has experience running a huge...
studio.
Studio. He has experience running a franchise.
Right.
He definitely plans things out. I just think that I think Star Wars would thrive under him, and I think that that's what you need for damage control.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, that would be a good super team, though.
And that would be great.
Feige, Filoni, the 3 Fs, Feige, Filoni, and Favreau. The law offices.
It does. It sounds like some sort of a law office. Like, I don't know whether they're going to make a movie or they're going to...
hand you like a class action lawsuit.
Yeah, or, I might have mesothelioma, so I can go talk to those guys, right? Yeah, I just think it's one of those things that they definitely have to do something. And here's the problem. They can't mess this up.
No.
That's the big thing. They have to get this right.
Yeah, they do.
This is basically going to determine the entire future of the Star Wars franchise. There is another possibility, though.
All right, Yoda.
Yes,
there is another.
There is another. It's been discussed. I don't know how far along it is. Give it back to Lucas. Or, don't necessarily give it back to him, but just, Lucasfilm was his. Let him run it.
He's got his name on it.
Got his name on it. Let him run it, or give him some sort of, maybe he becomes a creative director.
Or just make him like a consultant or something like that.
Something. But there has actually been talk that Lucas has basically been, a little bit not... He almost like regrets selling it to them. So if there was a way that he could get it back, I almost wonder if he would do it. Like, you know what? You guys have screwed this up. Let me fix it. But the question becomes, let's just go with that for a second. What if Lucas got it back? One, do you think ultimately it would be a good thing? And two, second part of this question, do you think fans would really accept it? Because remember, it's funny how time can change everybody's mind. During the prequels, everybody was like, let somebody else do Star Wars, Mm-hmm. You ruined everything or whatever. Now everybody's like, bring back Lucas.
Right.
You guys are like ruining Star Wars.
Well, it's kind of like when everybody was like, oh, they hated George Bush, but then now you get Trump, and you're like, oh, bring back Bush. He wasn't that bad.
Exactly.
I think here's the thing. What George Lucas is really great at is creating stories. He created great stories even with the prequels. They just were poorly executed. We've all pretty much have come to that agreement.
Yeah, that's because he tried to do too much. If he had done what he should have done exactly what he did with the original trilogy. Direct episode 1, set the tone, and then write the stories but turn it over to other directors for 2 and 3.
I mean, quite frankly, I don't even think he needs to even do the first one. I mean, Because I think the story is just...
Well, maybe not now because it's been established. I mean, he had to do 4 because obviously that was his. I mean, nobody would know how to do that.
Well, of course. I'm just talking about like episode 1. Like, okay,
yeah, but
like,
now you're right. You're right. With episode 1, it's like, okay, well, somebody did 5 and 6. Why can't? I mean, 1 is technically the 3rd or 4th movie that they would be making.
Right.
Even though it's a prequel, it's still, okay, we're just making a new Star Wars movie. Give it to somebody else. But you have to remember that enough time went by that people, it's almost like he has to reestablish his vision because it had been like 15, 16 years.
Well, my issue was the fact that so his original treatment for 7 was terrible.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm wondering, like, okay.
Well, maybe not. I mean, not to be some sort of an apologist, because at first, I remember the first reaction I had when I read it, I was like, oh, man.
You got Darth Vader.
I am
people
so glad.
with jetpacks and...
No. That was a Super Shadow thing.
Oh, no, that's right. No, the other one, but the one with the
nano,
bots. Yeah, that was
little nano creatures and all this stuff where he was kind of taking it to some weird...
science fiction.
True sci-fi type of thing.
Yeah, like on some Star Trek type stuff. And
it's like... I don't know, man. This is not... No. I was so thankful that somebody had it. But when you actually look at it in context, because remember, when that first came out, that was like the only bits of information.
Mm-hmm.
Then they started releasing more information on it. And the whole Rey character was named Kira, which I think they ended up lifting that name for Solo.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some similarities. Luke is training this new person and everything. It actually would have been kind of cool. I think that if Lucas had actually had a chance to make it and flesh it out, because remember, in the case of all the Star Wars movies, they were never really the way that his first draft went.
All right.
So I'm not saying that, obviously I don't have a world between worlds that I can jump and go take a look. But I have a feeling that it wouldn't have been as bad as what we thought it would have been early on.
I mean, that's true. I just think that, it's kind of hard because he's the creator. I mean, like, all this came from his mind. So this is all of...
Yeah, it's almost like you can't say that he's
almost,
wrong.
You can't, yeah, you
know,
can't,
it's like,
exactly. Like, he's almost... Like, you're going to argue with God about his creation? Like, really?
Right. So, I mean, it's
it's
kind of like... on one hand, but this is the thing that, to me, what I think should have happened if you wanted to create some utopian Star Wars franchise world, Lucas still would have been making the primary movies and then just let other people come in and make like these standalone films.
Well, see, like I said, I think even with... I won't even want to see him do the standalone. I mean, not the standalone, but the saga films. Like, write them, yes, but not direct or anything like that. Because once again,
that's what I mean. I mean, right.
Oh, okay. Well,
I
yeah,
mean, I don't necessarily
mean
direct. I mean, he could if he wanted, but I wouldn't.
If he's writing the story,
But I'm just saying it would be the best of both worlds. You can have Lucas maintaining the control and the direction, and he could even be the one to approve, much like what he did with the authors of the expanded universe. He could approve storylines. Hey, George, we want to make a movie about whatever. He could say something like, okay, yeah, cool, but don't have Yoda do this because he wouldn't do that. Don't have this person do that or whatever. Just like what he used to do with the books. But you can have him write or make, because even if he's not directing, he's going to produce it, he's going to do all this stuff. Have him making the main primary, what we might call the saga films, and then let other people do the standalone movies. They can be either original stories or maybe somebody adapts a book. Whatever the case may be. That, I think, would have been the best of both worlds. I think it would have been the perfect balance between the two.
It's a very great Jedi way of thinking.
But again, this is really interesting because with this Kathleen Kennedy thing, it's like there's the rumor basically comes down to her wanting to step down. It's basically a mutual agreement between her and Disney. She's not being fired. She's not really quitting. It's sort of like they've mutually agreed to reach the end of their partnership.
Right.
And she wants to start a more female-centric production company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Because that's another thing that's been... It hasn't been too bad, but there's been that slight SJW overtone to a lot of the Star Wars movies that, she's been doing. And it's like, when Lucas created all these, they were very much in the classic storytelling realm. I don't necessarily think you have to... They hit upon broad themes because everybody's like, well, you can apply, episode 3 to what was going on back then. I'm like, well, you can apply it to what's going on now, too. It's a timeless thing. Human beings throughout history tend to replay the same episode over and over. It's like, and that's it. It's the hero's journey, or it's, some of these other things. These like broad themes that they do. And you don't have to be too specific to a time period, because if you do that, you run the risk of it not being timeless anymore. And that's where I think Lucas's strengths were versus Kathleen Kennedy's trying to make it too relevant. It was kind of like one of the things that you said where she was trying to
micromanaging.
Yeah, micromanage and
she's trying to like make everything like about today in the modern.
Yeah, she's almost trying to like modernize. Like you had basically brought up that she was trying to make things too much like what they were. Like bring back that magic of it. I'm trying to like recreate the magic basically. Yeah. Versus just telling good stories.
Yeah, like that's what made the magic. It's like,
right.
If you want to recreate it, do what made it the original in the first place, and that was the story.
Well, but part 2 of that is that Lucas wasn't trying to make social commentary movies.
Right. He
was trying to make fantasy films that, number one, actually took your mind off of that stuff, but that was very classic storytelling, way to go. I mean, it wasn't like what it used to. There's some movies that are definitely going to be made because you want to make a statement based on, whatever's going on at the time. Star Wars was never supposed to be about that, and the problem is that she was trying to do too much social commentary on it.
Right.
Being inclusive, being, just jamming different things in just for the sake of doing it, and you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, because Star Trek started to do that too.
Yeah, it's like...
In fact, I think one of the funniest things that I remember was how George Takei, a gay man, was mad that they made the character that he used to play gay. And I think that took, I forgot who actually, if it was still Paramount or whatever, but on the reboots, that took everybody by surprise because they thought he would have been all supportive and champion it. And his point was, you don't need to do that. The character was never written that way.
Right.
You're trying to, like right wrongs or do whatever based on like a social commentary type of thing. Right. Let Star Trek be Star Trek.
Like, well, Uhura was black, or let's just make... We got to have somebody black in here, so let's just put him in this. Like, no, let's just find the best actress for this role. She just happens to be black or whatever.
Where I could start to see stuff like that would be like, okay, who was the Black Robin? Was it Tim Drake? Was he a white guy in the comic? There was a
Black Robin.
There was. I just don't remember who it was.
It wasn't Tim Drake.
Oh, you know what you could do? You could take Miles Morales, right? The Black Spider-Man.
Or Jon Stewart, like the Black Green Lantern.
There you go. Yeah, versus Hal Jordan.
Hal Jordan.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, if you're going to take, the Jon Stewart, you're going to make him the new Green Lantern and do that, and you're going to actually, you're following a storyline, you're doing that, makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But, when you're trying to make, like, Idris Elba the new James Bond, or you're trying to do like
Please don't get me started.
Or you're trying to like make a female like remember they were gonna do like a female James Bond at some point?
Yes.
Like Jane Bond or something.
Jamie or whatever.
Yeah, it's like
let's have a black Superman. Like
right.
No.
It's kind of like, okay, no, that's where you have to draw the line. And that's what I think Kathleen Kennedy was doing too much with Star Wars, was that she was trying to
pander
to different audiences and stuff like that. when it's like, no, just let the franchise be what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I think that that's one of the things that, you know, George did correctly.
Yeah.
And I mean, he balanced all that stuff out.
Yeah. Like I said, you got Lando, you had, you know.
Well, I mean, if you even look at it from the standpoint of, you know, like Lando's character, so okay, that'd be the minority thing, and then of course Princess Leia. Everybody forgets that she was one of the
Strong
first
female,
characters.
yeah.
I mean, that you didn't really see that a whole lot back then. It was still that damsel in distress kind of a thing.
Yeah, she was actually the one taking charge. Like, all right,
Yeah,
come on, fly
that
away,
was
let's get
that was a
in.
groundbreaking thing back then,
Yep.
and it's, you know, but it was done a very subtle
Yeah.
way. It wasn't like it was being shoehorned in and
It
like
was to advance the story. That's who the
Right.
character was. It
Right.
wasn't like I'm trying to, like you said, shoehorn it in or force this.
Because don't forget that George Lucas, this story cracks me up to this day. The whole reason why Star Wars was even made was because, thank goodness, he didn't get the rights to make Flash Gordon.
Right.
Because that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie, and then he couldn't get the rights to it. So he's like, all right, well, I'll just write a story kind of in that style, and that became Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's even just, you know, looking at, you know, the whole landscape of Star Wars. I mean, it's just, they just told great, like we always say, they just told great stories. It was really about, like I said, he took different things, like you could see things from the Bible that was, you know, present.
Mm-hmm.
You saw the whole samurai thing. You kind of saw the whole Wild Wild West thing. You had all these different.
So I mean, he kind of blended
he
all
had
these
this
different
amalgamation
like,
of
classic
stuff.
storytelling
classics.
kind of thing.
Yeah, and just kind of created his. And then of course he always wanted to have like a serial series, like almost like that's where you get the opening crawl
that's
and
what the whole Flash Gordon thing.
Yeah,
That's what
and
that
that's-
was all about.
yeah.
That was kind of like his template. And then what he did was he took the Joseph Campbell influence and
Yep.
you know, all these various you know, Western, Eastern religious type stuff, and then and then the cultures, and then you know he would do stuff like that, and you know, I mean, you can. I remember when everybody was up in arms about Episode I, where the Newt Gunray,
the one who sounds like he was
like you know,
he was Asian or something.
you're Italian or something, like it was just like stereotypical Italian or Middle Eastern kind of accent, like really, dude, but
yeah.
You know, again,
But even with like Chiwetel Ejiofor, like okay, like the fact like they got him because they wanted more Asian participation when it comes to their films because they didn't have any.
well, and that's exactly, and then you know, because they did that with the Meg. One of the things, I mean, you know how much it drives me nuts, but I rented it so my parents could see it not too long ago, like last week, and one of the problems that I had was how they changed a lot. But it turns out, this is what I hate that they had to do this, because the Chinese box office is so huge, and they wanted to appeal to it, and they were having a hard
name.
they changed the Tanakas from the Japanese into like these Chinese people and got these big Chinese actors in order to appeal to that box office, and a Chinese production company actually helped get the movie made. So it was kind of like a political thing made them shift the story. Now, again, if that had been the only change to that movie, I wouldn't have necessarily had a problem with it, because it's really the other changes that they made that, you know, from a very serious, dark, really good, that would have stood right up there with Jaws, because the source material was really good.
Speaking of which, that's actually coming to the Novi Drive-In.
What is?
Jaws. They're actually doing and they're also doing Force Awakens too.
Is it like a double feature?
No, so like imagine sidebar for those people who live in Michigan. So if you're near the Novi area, you know, because of the coronavirus and everything, we can't go to the movie theaters.
Right.
So in their parking lot, they're actually
I thought they were supposed to open like
it starts tonight.
Okay.
So Bohemian Rhapsody is like the first movie. And then they're releasing like a bunch of other movies like till like maybe Labor Day weekend. But one of the movies is The Force Awakens, and the other one is Jaws, the original.
You know, it's ironic because tomorrow, Jaws, they released a 4K version, like the whole UHD Blu-ray thing. So I ordered that. That's on its way. It should be here tomorrow. So tomorrow's my mom's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday!
So
Mom.
I mean, I'm pretty much probably that's what I'm going to do. Spend time with the parents, watch the 4K Jaws.
That's
You
cool.
know, that should be cool. But it's also worth noting they didn't do it in the U.S., but they re-released The Empire Strikes Back
Yeah.
overseas.
Yep.
And, of course, it topped the box office.
Once again.
Yep. I almost put that in one of our segments, but then I realized that we stream and we go on forever and ever, so I didn't have to put it in as an official thing and just
Right.
talk about it.
Yep.
But again, the fact that it tops the box office just shows you. This movie's like 40 years old or something stupid, and it's like still it has an audience.
Yep.
And that's the magic of what George Lucas created. Whereas like these Kathleen Kennedy just didn't really understand that. And I also think, to be fair, that Disney also, in the form of Bob Iger, probably put a bunch of pressure on her as well. But again, she would hire people and then fire them when they're 80% done with the movie and just really just didn't seem to have it together,
Yeah, that's what I said. I can't wait to see who they get to replace her. That's what it was going to be interesting.
Well, that's going to be the key right there is who are they going to get to replace her?
Yeah, I get the fact that she's stepping down. That makes sense. But who are you replacing her? Like, it can't be worse than her. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's going to happen. I could be wrong.
It's Disney.
It wouldn't be the first time.
They want to erase Canon, so I mean.
That's So I mean, who knows? But I really hope that, because here's another thing. Who's that? Remember that woman they hired that was supposed to be over the story stuff? Like, she was almost like a creative director.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
It was almost like they took Kathleen Kennedy's
And
job and split it.
Yep.
Hired this other woman to do it, to do like the more creative part, and then Kathleen was supposed to do like the business part or whatever. Which, that was okay, but you don't hear anything about her.
True.
So it's really weird what's going on over there. I mean, it seems like there's a civil war going on. And I brought that up before because you have Disney versus Lucasfilm. But then within Lucasfilm, there's been a huge civil war that broke out. You have the employees that are loyal to George Lucas versus the ones that are loyal to Kathleen Kennedy. And apparently that's like a big thing right now. And what's interesting about it is you have some former employees that used to work for Lucasfilm under Lucas that then stayed for a little bit under the whole Disney era. Now they've left and they're doing all these interviews on these podcasts. I've been trying to see if I can,
find some.
maybe I could find some and we can, get another little, little window in here that we could put a third person in and actually interview some of these people. A lot of them, they sign these NDAs, so they have to be really careful about what they say. But they were chronicling like, yeah, man, here's how it used to run and how it was cool, and then how it became not cool, and it was actually not a fun place to work anymore. They're very controlling and domineering, and whereas Lucasfilm, when Lucas was ahead, it was a little bit more relaxed and creative and cool, and it just changed. And that right there, to me, is like, this is what's wrong
with Star Wars.
This is why Star Wars is broken. And it pains me to say that.
Yeah.
But what about you guys? Do you guys think that, Kathleen Kennedy stepping down is a good idea? Because, look, there's people legitimately, and you would not, I can totally understand it if you were like, you know what? I don't have any problems with the way that she's running it. Or are you like the rest of the world? And, us who basically think that she's running it, but running it into the ground, needs to go immediately. Now, that said, what I would love for you guys to do is put in, if you're watching the rebroadcast, put in the comments section, or if you're chatting with us live, let us know. Who do you want to see replace her? Who would be like your ideal studio head, creative team? Let us know. All right. I think it's time for...
yes, your favorite.
Yeah, what's become my favorite segment. And this time, we actually got some people off of the QRA.com.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I've been doing. If you guys have questions and you go to QRA.com, basically I'm picking some of the ones because people actually, I mean, I've got something like 25,000 upvotes or something that people have actually been reading my answers to stuff. I was asked to be a partner and all this stuff. And it's,
defending Star Wars.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. So I get 20, 30 requests a week specifically for my answers to people's questions. So I thought, hey, why don't I pick a couple of those and put them on the show?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, let's go to the next segment. It's time to clear your mind. That's right. Clear your mind. Let go of your hate. And get ready to get all wound up again, because sometimes these questions really they set me off. I don't know why. It just
Let the hate
might
flow through
not
you.
be healthy. Maybe I'm going to stop taking people's questions, maybe, right?
Right.
All right, so this first question, who's it from?
It's submitted by John Michael Marcos.
Right. Like I said, we got QRA.com. What I've been doing is I've been answering these questions in the actual app, but I've given them the link, hopefully they're watching, and said, hey, if you guys want a little bit of a deeper answer, a little bit more explanation, and then some discussion based on it, we'll do that. And we'll do the same thing for you guys. If you submit a question to us, we'll put it on our Clear Your Mind segment, and, we'll go into it. And, eventually we'll probably do some Patreon stuff, and we'll get that going. But for now, what is the question?
Question is, which Star Wars franchise movie surprised you the most and why?
Okay, so what I wrote to John, right,
Mm-hmm.
is I basically said it was Empire Strikes Back. And I pointed out the fact that because I started seeing these things pretty much from the beginning in the theater. So, first one was released in 1977. My little 6-year-old butt was in the theater seeing that. And each of the subsequent movies I saw when they were released. It wasn't like, unfortunately, your situation where you had to go back and watch them on VHS and you heard people talk about them constantly, and it's like, okay, now I want to see these for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I'm being honest, I would say Empire Strikes Back, because you really didn't know where they were going to go after A New Hope. A New Hope was a very somewhat closed-in storyline. They were pretty much, you had the whole Tatooine thing. You would see the Empire a little bit on a Star Destroyer and the Death Star. But pretty much, if you're following our heroes, you're going from Tatooine to the Falcon to the Death Star to Yavin.
Mm-hmm.
It's very closed in.
Yep.
And a very tight storyline. Now, when Empire was released, we had no idea what to expect. Where is this going to go? They blow up the Death Star, spoiler alert. And, pretty much you have no idea where this movie is going to go. Where's it going to go? So Empire comes out. Immediately, we're greeted with, all these different things. We got the Big Hoth ground battle. We've got, all this stuff. You find out that the bounty hunters are after Han Solo.
The Wampa.
The Wampa. You see Han Solo actually use a lightsaber, which is kind of cool. And then you're meeting Yoda, this Jedi Master that was just mind-blowing because he was this really cool puppet, and it was like the next level of puppetry.
Right.
And he was so expressive. You had no idea. You were learning more about the Jedi. You were, and then of course the whole big "I am your father" thing, which is considered to be one of the greatest, cliffhanger, surprising things in movie history.
Right.
Not even limited to Star Wars. You just had a lot of things that were just crazy, and then Han Solo gets put into carbonite. You don't know where that's going. I mean, there were just surprise after surprise after surprise. Return of the Jedi, you already pretty much know the parameters of the story, because once again, like a lot of third movies of a trilogy, it's really all about just tying up everything that was set up in the first two films. So given that A New Hope was like the first movie of its kind, really, because Star Wars represented like another whole leap. Before that, I mean, you didn't have the whole moving camera plus moving the mouse. I mean, there's just so many technological things, not to mention even the editing, how fast-paced it was. It was crazy. Empire Strikes Back brought that up like a huge notch. Mm-hmm. And still to this day, when I was trying to think back and when we saw the movies, because you could even make an argument for Force Awakens too, because once again, you have no idea what's coming. But there wasn't anything in Force Awakens really that surprised me to the degree when I really think about it. Same thing with the prequels. There's just nothing that would compare to the Empire Strikes Back experience.
I would agree. I mean, for all those, I really can't disagree with one thing you said, honestly. I'll just only add that, there were some other things too, was the fact that like all the heroes at some point met Vader in Empire.
Yeah.
So...
Well, and then, of course, there was the whole duel between Luke and Vader. That was something that we were all thinking about after A New Hope was released. Like, oh, man, wouldn't it be cool if, like, Luke fought Vader? And then he does.
Well, yeah, I mean, see, for me, of course, knowing that there are more movies and, okay, I had this trilogy for, like, my birthday or something. And, it was much, for me, it was like that when I first started watching the show 24, and you guys kept trying to tell me to watch it, and I just kept blowing out. That's how I felt about Star Wars. Like, I never really, because I didn't know what it was. One day I was bored, and I decided to pop it in, instantly hooked. And I'm like, whoa.
Now you're doing a podcast.
I know, man. It's like, forever would have dominated my destiny.
Yeah.
But.
And your wallet.
Yes. But the thing is, though, is like, I feel like Empire was amazing, even for the little things that they're big, but they're little at the same time. For example, the music. You got the Hanalea thing, the Imperial March. Like, these are like iconic. Of course, like the Star Wars, theme and the Twin Suns, theme. That's iconic too. But like Empire kind of gave you that gravitas. It did, and it was that vibe,
and you didn't expect it. See, the thing is that no matter what you point to in either the prequels or the sequels, or even maybe Return of the Jedi, I mean, anything other than A New Hope. I mean, I could say that the only one that could tie Empire is maybe A New Hope, because when you're first seeing A New Hope, you have no idea what to expect.
Yeah, you don't have any expectation.
You're just like, whoa, this is really kind of but that whole movie was a surprise.
Yeah.
But if I'm being honest, if you're dealing with surprises, there's, like you're pointing out, even the music.
Yeah.
It's just taking it up a notch. You don't expect that.
Yeah.
And you don't really know what to expect.
The new look of Vader, like, when you see Vader in A New Hope, he's kind of has that matte finish.
Well, think about this. A lot of the new, like, you're introduced to the TIE bomber. Mm-hmm. You're introduced to the Super Star Destroyer.
You're introduced to the Emperor.
To AT-ATs.
You're introduced to force choking. Well, no, actually, we got that in A New Hope.
We did get that in A New Hope.
But just like Vader.
But force choking across,
a
galaxy type of thing.
Yeah. And
Snow troopers.
Yeah, snow troopers.
Because that was the first time that you saw a different type of trooper.
Yeah.
You just assume that they all look like the classic stormtrooper design. I mean, there's so many different surprises.
Yeah, just the way it was shot too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the close-ups that they did, like, or the lighting, like that. You always talk about your favorite scene of, the Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you're not a Jedi yet. But just like the fact that there was the smoke and everything is kind of filling the room. He's got this black silhouette. Luke is looking up at him. You got those red lights that's leading on the staircases. I mean, just everything was so...
Well, and even the character of Lando.
Yeah, Lando.
Lando was a surprise,
And then, you didn't know what was going to happen. Like, what the heck is carbonite? It's like, oh, yeah,
Boba
freezing.
Fett?
Yeah, Boba
Carbonite.
Fett.
Ugnaughts.
They have spoken. Yeah. So, and then of course, like Luke getting his hand lopped off. We can't leave that.
Yes.
And then of course
that was a big shock.
And then I always wondered, like, okay, I was always confused. Because how the heck was Luke talking to Leia through the Force? And
See, and that's what
and
I'm
you
saying.
didn't. That
It's
was your
like
first glimmer that
virtually
Leia had it.
Every scene is a surprise.
Yeah.
Is a complete surprise. Like you don't even see it coming.
Yep.
The whole movie's like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that, when you're asking, like, what's the biggest, how do you word it?
What
The question.
The biggest surprise. Which Star Wars franchise movie surprised you the most?
Yeah. I mean,
And I can't forget about this scene, because this is like when you really truly understand the Force, is when you see Yoda like actually lift the X-wing out and fly it across the. I'm like, whoa, okay.
oh, absolutely.
Like,
You never
okay.
saw anything like that. So it just, first of all, it's surprising how good it is. And then secondly, it's just like what we've just done. Scene after scene after scene. It's just a continual surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And none of the other franchise movies really totally lived up to that surprise.
Nope, not at all.
And didn't have as many surprises. Not to mention the fact that once the original trilogy was complete, now it's just adding to. It's not. I'm not saying that it's impossible to surprise, because
they
Rogue
did it.
One. Rogue One had a lot of surprising moments.
Don't, but I mean, like, as much as people hated it, but The Last Jedi had a lot of surprises.
Yes, it did.
I mean, good and bad.
Well, I'll tell you what. The biggest, I think okay, if I had to give my two biggest surprises of The Last Jedi, one is when Luke gets the lightsaber and he chucks it.
Yeah.
Nobody expected
that one, yeah.
The other one was Yoda's cameo, and then he shoots the lightning, and he's able to, do all that stuff. That was kind of a surprise.
Mine would be, although it was cheesy, it was kind of cool, but like the whole Leia thing, like just the fact that Leia was able.
Oh, the Mary Poppins scene?
Yeah, just because you've never seen Leia use the Force.
True. Very
so
true.
That was a surprise. And then, of course, the ultimate is like Luke's Force projection. I mean,
Luke's Force projection.
That was just amazing.
So actually, yeah, and it's ironic because both Empire and Last Jedi are the second movies of their respective trilogies.
Yep.
So I mean I still think that just because of the newness and just the sheer amount of surprises.
Yeah, Empire hands down.
And I mean, come on, the I am your father thing. There's nothing more shocking than whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
Vader's his father.
Yeah, and it's amazing that even as a kid, like this thing came out. So Empire came out in what,
1980.
80?
Yeah.
So I maybe didn't even get the movies until maybe 92, 3.
Yeah, because I remember when we even put this whole show together, and the whole idea is like two generations. Because when you got into Star Wars, it was between the original trilogy and the prequels, but it was also a little bit north of when the novels started coming out, too.
Yeah.
So that whole second resurgence of Star Wars before the prequels were going to come out, that's around the time that you started getting into it.
And it's funny because, like, all that time, no one told me that Darth Vader was Luke's father. Like, there was no spoilers.
Really?
Like, I didn't know going into
Well,
as
there
a
was
kid.
no real internet back then, too, I mean.
Yeah, I mean that, but I mean just like people talking about like, oh, you're watching Empire. Yeah, this is when we find out that like no one spoiled it for me. Like no one just blurted it out.
That is amazing.
Because everybody in my house, they've already lived out through it already. So they're just like, oh yeah, this is on.
So it must have been before like Tommy Boy then, right? When he's like yelling at the fan, "I am your father."
Well, people will say, but I had no context.
No context, right?
So I'm just like, okay, he's his father.
Interesting.
Yeah. So then when you watch it as a kid, you're like, hey, did you know that Darth Vader? And they're like, yeah, like 20,
yeah, right. Like,
8 years ago we
kind of
found
known it for about 15 years, man. Way to catch up.
All right, catch up, Mustard.
All right, so who is our second Cure? I don't want to say winner because it's kind of like they didn't even enter, really. They just asked me a question, but
they're winner.
Our second chosen question.
Everyone's a winner. Question is submitted by Chris Ann Small. And the question is, do you think Star Wars is the best sci-fi movie of all time?
Now, I went into a completely different direction when I
know
answered
you
this.
did, because you have to be clear. I already know. I was like, yep, they're about to experience what I experienced.
I said, no, it's not. And the reason it's not is because it's not a sci-fi movie. It is actually a fantasy film.
Yep, I knew you were going there.
Or a sci-fi fantasy film if you want to get a little bit more, niche down. And the thing is, it's not even operating like a sci-fi movie. So you can't really say it's basically like a fantasy film that has sci-fi elements to it. Mm-hmm. But it's firmly rooted in fantasy.
True.
And so because of that, yeah, there's a lot of sci-fi films that you could say are better than Star Wars probably because it's not truly a sci-fi film, and it would be completely unfair to categorize it as such. That was basically what I did, but expounding on the point, it's interesting because it really is difficult, I think, for a lot of people to separate the sci-fi from the fantasy in Star Wars in people's minds.
Well, people just take, anything dealing with space, science fiction.
Space or ships or anything like that. But if you actually really look at...
I mean, if that's the case, then Jason 10 was a sci-fi movie
well,
at some point.
Then people would argue that it was sci-fi horror. People call Alien sci-fi horror, and that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But I think that what you have to look at is the fact that, so George actually did the very brilliant thing of making sure that his universe was lived in, and it wasn't so sci-fi-ish as much as it was just part of the way these people lived their lives. It wasn't, a ship to them was no different than a car. It wasn't, it was funny about how the way he presented it, that it's very much a sci-fi type of I guess like a...
landscape?
Yeah, like a landscape or whatever, but it really wasn't. If you really look at the type of film it was. Star Trek is sci-fi. Mm-hmm. Flash Gordon, you could even almost say that's sci-fi fantasy too. But, it basically, and that's why I really have a problem with when people are too hard on the Jedi. Oh, how come they can't do this or they could do this? It's like, guys, it's fantasy. It doesn't have to be explained. Mm-hmm. When the wizard's out there, like, casting a spell on a dragon or something, you're not sitting there like, well, what's the physics behind this, man? I mean, nobody's saying that because everybody is programmed, like Lord of the Rings. It's fantasy. But Star Wars is the same way. Mm-hmm. That's why I think that one critical mistake that Lucas did make was when he tried to bring that whole midichlorian thing in. Yeah. It's like, okay, now you're further... it used to drive him nuts that people would classify it as a sci-fi film. It's like, well, now you're bringing sci-fi elements into it. Mm-hmm. So what do you think people are going to do?
True.
And that's why I think that sometimes when people... they basically criticize Star Wars. They're criticizing it based on a like a sci-fi-ish type of a thing when it's really more fantasy than sci-fi. Yeah. So I think that that's a really important distinction to make.
Well, I mean, they do a lot of things with, like you said, you can look at the Marvel, like, superhero universe, it's like, okay, well, why didn't Superman just... blow the kryptonite out of Luthor's hand, and he wouldn't have to worry about it. He could blow his breath like, 200 feet, from some just... As soon as he comes out with some kryptonite, blow it out.
That actually brings up another good point, too, because now you could classify the whole superhero genre, and I'm talking even the comic books. Like, this is before they were made into movies, even before Alexander Salkind made Superman the movie. You can classify it as sci-fi-ish, but it really is kind of fantasy as well.
Oh, yeah.
Just different. When people think of fantasy, you think of movies like, Never-Ending Story and your Lord of the Rings and...
Harry Potter or something.
Harry Potter and, stuff like that. But, I mean, there's a lot of movies that are actually... or Clash of the Titans or something. I mean, but
like
if you think about it...
And that type
yes.
Of stuff, yeah.
And if you think about it, Star Wars has created like its own mythology, and same thing with the superheroes. And so a lot of times people go, well, this is unrealistic. Now, I can understand when people point out unrealistic things within the context of its universe. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like if you introduce a concept and you explain it within that universe, if you violate that,
right,
that's a problem. Because this is a question, I don't think I've actually answered this yet, but a question that I get on Q&A a lot is, well, how come the Jedi just didn't and whatever it is? And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, the one we point out all the time in The Phantom Menace. It's like, well, how come when those fish were chasing them down and then they were shocked? It's like, well, why didn't you feel that in the Force?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and how many times have we said, well, why are you guys doing this? Just,
Force choke it or something.
yeah, force choke it or blow up its heart or do this or, like when Luke fought the Rancor.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he go through all that?
Right.
He could have just choked the thing.
He even needed to throw the rock at the thing. He could have just used the Force.
He could have pushed it.
Oh, yeah, and just used the mechanism and just
and just like waved his hand and the thing could have just, but again, that wouldn't have made for a good, and this
the
is where,
suspense of it all. Right.
Yeah, you have to understand, this is a movie, not a documentary. And I think that's the problem. That's what I always say to people, I'm like, guys, it's not a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like you do know this isn't real. I mean, what was always cracking me up is back when I was a kid, my dad, we would be watching something like Star Wars, or we would be watching some, fantasy or sci-fi thing. And he'll pick on this one thing like, it's not very realistic that, X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, yeah, well, you do realize they're all flying around in spaceships and doing, I mean, the whole thing is kind of based on not realistic here. I mean, this is the thing that you're picking on?
Or as my favorite line is, well, how come they just didn't do that? Because then it wouldn't be a movie.
Yeah.
It's like...
Or, my favorite one, well, why didn't they do that? Because the script didn't say that.
Right.
I mean, you have to... There's certain... Unfortunately, in storytelling, you're bound by certain rules, and there's even things that... Lucas... Now that's funny.
Yeah. Almost had a McNeil
Almost
moment.
had, yeah. But the thing that's funny about it is that people they'll pick on certain elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not understanding that, as Lucas even pointed out, when people were saying different things about how, but you repeated this or whatever, he's like, yeah, it's like rhymes. It's like, there's certain literary things that you are actually adhering to that people may not necessarily understand because they never studied it.
Mm-hmm.
They're just basing it on whatever, and I understand that too, but at the same time, it's kind of like there is some thought behind this.
Sure.
You can't... I mean, if you were to... It's just like reality shows. Reality shows aren't real.
Definitely not.
They just basically... record you for like 3 days straight, 24/7, and then the producers and everybody goes in there, they watch the footage, they say, okay, how can we make this into some dramatic piece of storytelling?
Mm-hmm.
And then they edit it all together, and they actually make it into something that it really wasn't, and sometimes they're like, hey, you're not crying hard enough, do that again. I mean, it's staged.
Yep.
It's theater.
Yeah.
But there's people out there that actually think it's real. And it's like, if it
Yeah,
were
and
real,
they're so
you'd be
invested
bored to
into it.
tears.
Yeah.
Real isn't interesting.
Exactly. Like, you're not seeing people go to the bathroom and just sit there and
Or just-
look at their phone.
Right.
You're not watching people just make breakfast and then, call their mom and...
I mean, I guess unless you're subscribing to some, hot girl's webcam or something. But even then, she's gonna
do
theater.
something.
It's, besides the obvious, I mean, she's going to create a personality.
Right.
To, not that I, subscribed. I realize everybody's like, oh, how do you know so much about... But, it's kind of the same thing.
It's our job we're doing production.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. It's just, I mean, that's just what it is. And these are the kinds of things that I think that if people understand, they would look at these things differently and they wouldn't criticize them as heavily.
Sure, definitely.
But, and again, one of the things that I've often said, and this goes back, is that, and this actually has to do with really the whole theme of this show, which has been, where is Star Wars really going? What's going to happen to it? We talked about these movies that they made. They do questionable. Are they going to just delete them? Okay. then is the studio head going to step down? And then if they did delete them, what are they going to replace them with? And all this other stuff. And people just have to understand that everybody's going to have a different opinion as far as where they should go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's going to be people that they love the sequel trilogy. They don't want to see it. There's other people that are like, yes, delete it. Okay, what do you replace it with? Okay, these people think you should replace it with the Zahn Trilogy. These other people think you should do something different. That's the beauty of the way things are, is that everybody has a different opinion. But ultimately, I think what everybody should understand is that as long as what you pointed out, they just tell really good stories and they make it feel like Star Wars, I think we're going to be fine.
Definitely. That's it.
You know, I think we'll be fine. But I think that's going to wrap it up for our show today.
Yes, sir.
You know, this week, of course, we had fun, you know, spending another Friday night with you guys. So just a little bit of a show note here. The next few weeks are going to be a little strange because I know you're not going to be able to be here next week. So I'm probably going to do a solo show. No pun intended. And, you know, then, of course, things at work are a little crazy. Yeah. So generally speaking, guys, we are here every single week at 8 o'clock, every Friday at 8. But sometimes life gets in the way. You know, maybe situations will change and, you know, we can actually support ourselves with this show. That would be nice. We're going to start taking donations on this show pretty soon. So that way we can still afford to bring it to you guys. But, you know, let us know in the chat section. Well, you got like maybe 3 minutes. But if you're watching the rebroadcast, let us know, you know, anything that you guys want about, you know, the show today or any suggestions you may have. If there's any questions that you guys might have, let us know. I think that's going to do it. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.